For those who don't know, Joseph and I have been what we can call both ideological opponents, but at this point, I can also call him a friend. And we've had a few debates, one on his channel, one on mine. And now, for the first time, we're actually going to have a conversation. Now, we will move it to Q&A at some point. That might turn into debate. There's a diverse crew here, no guarantees, but we're here to better understand one another and just to explore the ideas in a good faith manner. So, Joseph, it's great to have you.
Sorry, I'm still a total boomer when it comes to Discord.
All good.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, that's a great setup you have.
Thank you.
Yeah, I
It's,
think I got
it's temporary. I'm in the midst of moving house, so there might be a bit of an echo, but other than that, it should be
no,
good.
it's coming in well, and it's inspiring me. I got to get a background like that. I'll need to talk to you about how to set that up. So, Joseph, you founded the Israel Advocacy Movement. It's exactly as it's described, an Israel Advocacy Movement. Can you talk a little bit more about the nature of your work there, what the goal of it is, what kind of stuff you do?
So, what most people watching this won't know is my background, and it's probably worthwhile starting there to explain the Israel advocacy movement. The real obstacle that the Jewish people face today is anti-Semitism in the shape of anti-Zionism, and so I launched the Israel advocacy movement as a digital platform to challenge that. We've since grown into the largest pro-Israel platform in the UK. Last year, 100 million people watched the videos. So we have a very broad reach, only 17% of those being Jewish viewers, at least according to the polls that we run. And so we're really breaking out of the echo chamber. We have a large Muslim, Hindu, and Christian audience. And yeah, we look to challenge anti Semitism, anti Zionism, and preserve the Jewish people. Creating a safer tomorrow for my children is my number one objective. That's what gets me out of bed in the morning.
Awesome, thank you. So when you do this work, do you ever feel news comes out that Israel did something, a war crime was committed? Do you feel like it puts you in a situation where you might want to speak about it, but you don't want to contribute to all the hate, so you kind of decide to just focus on other stuff? Like how do you address the negative?
So I'll give you a very honest answer. Israel has no shortage of people who will jump on every atrocity that's carried out in the name of the Jewish state. Um, if a soldier so much as sneezes in the wrong direction, Al Jazeera is going to be running a headline story. And so there are millions and millions. I mean, you only need to look at the acceleration of anti Semitism online. Every major right wing pundit now is pivoting to anti Zionism, but it's really anti Semitism. They're now just going after the Talmud, etc., which has nothing to do with let's call it political Zionism. And so I I leave it to others to be critical of Israel. I think there's no shortage of people that will do that. But the honest, I mean, that was an honest answer, but the honest component to what I'm going to say is the thing that I find the hardest on a personal level is whenever an atrocity breaks, my initial instinct is to look to debunk it. And that's a horrible place, like on a human level, to find yourself, is you have such distrust in what's coming out that if you're greeted with the images of what can be a genuine atrocity or a genuine, like a heartbreaking story, you're not looking to validate it. You're looking to invalidate it because of the nature of the conflict. And that's not come from a vacuum. That's come from, I mean, everybody who's watching this will be aware of the propaganda that's produced by both sides, but from our perspective, we would call it Pallywood, and it's been done for decades now. There's countless examples of genuine fake footage coming out of Gaza or Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, and so it robs you a little bit of your humanity, this conflict, and that you're looking to debunk rather than your first instinct being one of pity. So that's a very honest answer, as honest an answer as I think I can give.
Well, I appreciate you giving that honest answer. And I think you express the sentiment of many Israelis and Zionists around the world even if they're concerned about an atrocity or human rights abuse, the last thing they want to do is contribute to all the hate. And this is feedback I get all the time from fellow Jews and fellow Israelis that say, at the end of the day, Adar, the things you're saying are being used by those who hate you and your family and wish to see you destroyed. And I actually, I agree with that to some extent. But the way I look at it is, I think we're better off if those who care for the people living on the land are the ones leading in the critique, right? So I just wonder if there's a way that those who actually care about Israel and care about the people living here can position themselves in a way where they could do advocacy, but where they're also the ones who are being the most honest in the critique, instead of letting the critique be dominated by those who don't really care. Have you considered that?
I think those that, because of the way that social media works and the way that algorithms work, you can never, no one is able to truly remain neutral on this. The greatest example would be Haaretz. I think Haaretz started with good intention. And today it is the go-to of every anti-Semite on the planet. And they will maybe even spin it to an even greater elaboration or exaggeration. So someone like Jackson Hinkle, who the Harris will then put a cease and desist on him because it's been picked. But these stories are picked up by anti-Semites, and you can. What my experience has been, and I would count you in this camp, is those that remain neutral shift one or two ways. They either go, I don't like the left or the right binary because it doesn't work for this conflict, but they either move to the right or they move to the left because that's what their audience wants. That's what the algorithm rewards. I'll give you an example with YouTube. YouTube rewards repetition. If you put out the same video every single week with a slight tweak on it, hitting the exact same talking points to the exact same audience, YouTube knows exactly who to give your content to, and so you will grow and grow and grow. So if you're a dogmatic right-wing, hardcore settler, and you just continue with that message, YouTube knows exactly who to put your content to. The minute you contradict that message, the audience that you've built online will not watch that, so the YouTube will not serve the video and it won't grow the video. So the way that technology works is it rewards huge partisan binaries where you're either left, you're right, you're Trump, the minute you deviate from that script, you lose your
Right.
platform. And so I think that's what happens to everybody I've seen that sits in this neutral camp online, at least, is they drift into one camp and they become more and more left wing or more critical of the state. So I imagine if you, on a personal level, because you'll be critical of what I say, if you go back to the messaging you were giving at the very beginning, I imagine you are more critical of Israel today than you were 10 years ago. And the audience that you're building will validate you as you become more critical. I mean, people responded on your tweet about me coming on here that
Right.
I dehumanize Palestinians. How could you have this person on? That's a perfect example of what I'm talking about. Your audience will reward a certain type of guest, a certain type of message, and the minute you deviate from that, the bigger of a challenge it will be to reach anybody. And so, yeah, that's a very honest answer as to why I don't
Yeah.
think.
I think it's a good point, and for my own personal journey doing content and advocacy, I'm very aware of those pressures. So it's true that I'm more critical of Israel now than I used to be, but I also attribute that primarily to the situation on the ground changing quite significantly. I didn't get to live through a situation where we saw the destruction of Gaza and so many dead civilians. I'm reacting to that, but I will be honest. Because I've been critical of Israel, I would say probably most of my followers today are anti-Israel, and it makes me a little bit more cautious if I'm going to do something that might trigger them. Personally, it doesn't entirely stop me. Like there's very few pieces of content I've ever done that don't get me to lose some amount of followers. I gain some, I lose some because it's just all over the place. But I recognize that I feel the pressure, and I know that's a pressure everybody in the advocacy space feels. So you're right. It's like most people struggle to kind of be balanced and nuanced. So that causes those who are in thought leadership positions to also take one extreme or the other.
I'll give you a very real example from my perspective. So I'm going to give two examples of stories I've worked on. So one was many months ago now, near the beginning of the conflict. There was a video that went viral of a Palestinian family holding, well, not family, sorry, some Palestinian, I think some of them were related, but some Palestinians walking towards what you assume to be an IDF position, and they're holding a white flag. Some shots ring out, the camera cuts, and then when the camera rolls again, you see one of the men lying, I think from memory, on his back. He'd been killed, he'd been shot after the gunshots had been fired and they started to run. And so I got some analysts to look at the video, and we kind of identified multiple caliber weapons were shooting. So we ascertained there was a gunfight between the IDF and somebody, presumably militants, Palestinian militants. And we were able to calculate how fast they'd run and how far they'd gone, so the distance that they'd traveled, so how many seconds it had been before the first shot and the person dying. We'd been able to ascertain they were running from the IDF position. And so I released the video. And then the next day, either ITV or CNN released a video from another angle. And that video didn't have a cut. And what happened was the people who were running after the gunshots were fired that were holding the white flag, they ran and retreated back to where the civilians were. And then they advanced again. And it was on that advance that one of them was shot. And so my video, my analysis, everything was redundant. And so we'd done this big OSINT investigation and realized actually we got it wrong. So we pulled the video because we don't want to be responsible for disinformation. One of the depressing things about that was some of my followers, a small number, begged me to put the video back, and I explained that it was incorrect information, and their response was, "It doesn't matter, it's a good story." And it's like, that's not, we have to be honest. So for me, that was the first major learning curve where I put something out which was just factually wrong. We invested a lot of time and energy producing the video, but we pulled it. Then to bring that to a more contemporary incident is the ambulance convoy. Now I've seen you've been gunning hard. It's a terrible choice of words. You've been pushing this hard. This is a war crime. This is an atrocity. I've stepped away from this because there's just not enough information to know what happens. All the witness testimonies are contradicting the video footage. The video footage is contradicting the IDF's original messaging. And so when you have a situation like that, what I'm now doing is stepping away, and I'm forced to wait until an official investigation, either by Israel or by a third party, and because it is. So somebody, I don't know what the emoji was, but there was an emoji that
There'll
across
be
the screen.
emojis here and there, yeah.
Yeah, and so from my perspective, what I don't want to do is put out disinformation. I don't want to guess. I also, if something has, if an atrocity has been committed, I don't want to be providing cover for that. And so I want to wait until there's enough information to put forward a strong case for what's happened. And I don't believe that is the case now. And I learned my lesson in previous incidents. So I won't rush to condemn like others will, who may be more, I mean, obviously I'm an activist, but I do, while I'm not neutral, I'm clearly partisan. I try to be honest, and and I don't want to ever find myself in a position where I'm defending something that goes against my own moral compass.
Yeah, I hear that, and that's respectable. As much as we disagree, I think that the fact that you still care about what's true is important. A lot of, I don't like being in wars with individuals. I like to challenge ideas, but there are a few people that I'm constantly debunking on my Twitter because they just lie. And for some reason, I'm sensitive to lies and misinformation. but I think that's one of the reasons why I described you as an ideological opponent, but also a friend, because I don't see you as a bad faith actor, despite our disagreements. If I'm to reflect more on what I would say I'm trying to build and what I hope to inspire others to view things similarly, like you spoke about the fast growth, and I get it. I kind of would rather have slow growth, but kind of build this coalition of nuanced thinkers that are humanist and want what's best for both sides. And I mean, it's like a slow and tedious process. It's not viral. It's, it doesn't speak to like the masses. But if we're not doing this for impact, then why are we doing it at all? So I guess I'm wondering, now there's a trade-off, right? One is like, let's say you get you could create a video that gets 1,000 views, but if it changed 10 minds, that's better than a video with 100,000 views that changed one mind, right? But what kind of responses do you get? Because you put out a lot of content that gets a lot of views. What kind of responses do you get from people that allow you to see the impact you're having?
So for me, I don't want to speak to the echo chamber with anything I'm producing, which is why we have so few Jews consuming our content. But I also don't want to speak to those that wish me dead, because there's no point. I'm not going to win them over. I used to think you could, and it was naivety on my half. Who I want to speak to are the undecided, the overwhelming majority of the world that doesn't have an opinion on the conflict, or they're not as entrenched. I think the model that you're pursuing worked 20, 30 years ago, but in the age of technology, it doesn't work. You'll grow a small coalition, but you'll change nothing. And to make any substantial change, you need to reach a large audience. And so that's my objective. My objective is to reach a large as an audience as possible, with a simple message that the Jewish people deserve and have every right to live in this land, not at the expense of anybody else, not driving anybody else out of the land, but we have every right to be here. And it's actually our survival is dependent upon this. And the more people I can reach with that message, the better it is. That's the thrust of my work, is reaching those people with that message to win hearts and minds for our existence. It's insane that I'm just trying to convince people that I have a right and my family have a right to exist. There's no other nation on earth where that's a thing, but unfortunately for the Jewish people it is. And so that's I think you will create a small community of like-minded people, but it's not going to bring peace. There's no partners for peace today amongst the majority body of Palestinians, and Israeli society is now going the other way. It's harder and harder to
Yeah,
find people that support a two-state solution.
I don't disagree, but I think it's important to not measure one's advocacy on like being able to see the noticeable impact on a macro, because it will be disheartening to most people, right? The way to get like masses to act is to say all you need to do is change a few minds and you'll have an impact on this world. One to change a few, few to change many, many to change the world. And I think that is something that's just easier for the masses to resonate with, right? If people didn't get out of bed and work for change because they themselves didn't think they could make a big difference, then we'd have less people working for change. So I think I definitely see the value in large platforms, but I think we also need to recognize grassroots and just individuals' ability to also impact those around them. Everyone can have an impact, just depends on what scale. I will say though, I kind of adopted a new strategy because I think our populations, both our populations, are way too radical for any change to come from within currently. I think change will come from pressure from the United States. But currently, the United States acts as an enabler to Israel, which I view Israel acting as, if I'm to give an analogy, you have like Israel's an addict, a violent addict, and America is their parent, just giving them a blank blank check to buy drugs and do whatever they want. And because I care about Israel, I'm kind of trying to convince America to change their approach to Israel, to not be an enabler, but put real pressure on Israel to reform, which is interesting. So, how do you do that? You actually need to convince Americans to change how they feel about Israel so that a president can't win without being more critical of Israel. So that's actually my new strategy, which is different than what it used to be because I interact with Israelis all the time. I interact with Palestinians, but like we've been pushed to the point where the majority, like we're so radical that if the other side just disappears, whether it's ethnically cleansed or genocided, we won't shed a tear. In fact, many of us will cheer. And I don't want to demonize either population. That these populations, this is how we respond to conflict. But I just don't know how to change that. So I think we need to change the institutions, but the institutions often reflect the people. So how do you change an institution? Okay, external pressure. So that's how I've been approaching it.
So I think an important exercise to run when adopting such a strategy is to take it to its end goal. What's the worst that could come of your advocacy? And so I think the turn of young Americans from Christianity, from Israel, will actually put the Jewish community in a very vulnerable position. At the moment, my team, my camp, is celebrating Trump in the White House. But Trump's arrival has also brought with it a empowered far right anti-Semitic right. And while Trump is a huge fan of the Jewish people and the state of Israel, I think that's very apparent from his actions, his family, etc.
Yeah.
His replacement may not be as fond. And if you look at the Candace Owens, the Ian Carrolls, the left, the right, the truthers, the noticers, they're gunning not just for it starts with Israel. That's the acceptable face. Again, as I was saying at the beginning, this is the acceptable face of anti-Semitism. But it very quickly pivots into hardcore anti-Semitism, discussing the Talmud, Frankist cabals controlling the world, etc. And so I think not only do you endanger Israel with such a strategy of trying to turn Americans against Israel, you also endanger American Jews because they're the next in the firing line.
I think that there's a case to be made, but at the end of the day, nothing is radicalizing people around the world more than videos of dead babies, right? Like me being a Jewish Israeli that's being critical of Israel in a way that I know is triggering is not radicalizing people. It's the dead babies that are radicalizing people. If
I
anything, I
disagree.
would
I think
think.
you are radicalizing people. I'll give you an example. I heard you say that you believe there is an 8-to-1 civilian to militant ratio in Gaza.
I put the range at between 4-to-1 to 9-to-1. Yeah.
Okay, so Israel's saying 20,000. Hamas, the Ministry of Health, is saying 50,000. I know we've had arguments about the data, and there's been revisions, and I've seen what you've written about the revisions, so we don't have to open that conversation. But let's just take their 50,000 to 20,000. So you're saying that 20,000, which would be 1 to 1.5.
No, but I don't. But here's the thing: the 20,000. If there's 20,000 combatants, then most of them are not on the list because the demographics of the list paint a very specific picture. If the amount of combatants on the list that can reasonably be there is around 5,000. So if there's 20,000, there's 15,000 combatants that have not been added to the list.
So this is my straight question to you. You genuinely believe in all you've seen the level of arms. You've seen how we've taken out the entire leadership of Hamas. You've seen how their ability to strike Israel has been hugely reduced. You've seen that the gunfights have basically dried up. There's no, at the beginning of the wars, you had those horrendous, atrocious videos coming out with the red triangles every single day. They've stopped coming out. Their fighting capacity is eliminated. Gaza is divided into all of these contained little areas, 5 contained areas.
Right.
And you're saying in all of that, in all that you're looking at the destruction of buildings at an unprecedented scale for certainly for Israel and the Gaza and the West Bank, you're saying in that you think that Israel's only killed 5,000 militants.
So that's not my claim. My claim is that's the only amount that could be on the list. I think it's quite possible that there's a fair bit of combatants that currently aren't on the list. So, and this is an investigation I have not done yet, but I just don't have time. There is a way to identify this if we were to just find a list of all the publicly reported combatants that have been killed through social media posts, etc. And if we see what percent of them are on the list, if we see that the majority of them are on the list, then the civilian to combatant ratio is in the 8 to 1 range. But it's possible that they're just not being added to the list at the same rate. That's why I put a very broad between 4 to 1 to 8 to 1. In terms of what we're seeing in Gaza, I mean, their capability is reduced for the reasons you said. I mean, Gaza's been destroyed. They don't have, you know, a lot of the tunnels have been destroyed. They don't have the same infrastructure to be able to launch these attacks. But how can you, from that, assess if it's 5,000 or 20,000? I like, there's nothing from what we're seeing in Gaza to be able to tell us which number it is. The reason I think it's a fair bit less than 20,000 is two reasons. One, any claim that Israel can make, and this is true, I'm not going to say this is only Israel, but any party in war, if they can make a claim that they don't need to prove that supports their war efforts or PR, then they have a great incentive to over-exaggerate. So I think if Israel killed 20,000, they'd probably say 1,000. They killed 10,000, maybe they're saying 20,000. I think that that's natural, but there's more reason to believe that it's inflated. From a whistleblower report and said, you know, there were these no-go zones, and we would just shoot anybody in the no-go zone. In fact, a new report from Breaking the Silence came out today describing something similar. And anytime somebody was killed in a no-go zone, they were listed as a combatant. So it seems like it's just civilian men being shot and they're listed as combatants. But the demographics of the available data does not leave much room for combatants. I've done I don't want to bore people with the math. I've written about it. We've gone through it. But back to what you're saying. So, like, I hear what you're saying. In a sense, I've become one of like the main people analyzing and discussing the death toll in Gaza, and to the point where it's certainly convincing some people that it's bad, and you think that could radicalize some people. What I think is happening, and this is also based on messages I get from people, people tell me all the time that they are disheartened by seeing how few Jews are speaking up for what they view to be an atrocity. And to see Jews speaking up gives them hope, gives them hope that we're not all evil. Like, people actually think Jews are evil. And again, part of it is rooted in conspiracy, but a lot of it is connected to the fact that we're seeing, you know, dead children daily, and most Jews are either silent about it or somehow defending it. That's going to radicalize you not just against Zionism, that's going to radicalize you against Jews. So I actually think Jews speaking out against the atrocities helps de-radicalize them and see it's like, okay, Israel's committing an atrocity, but look at all these Jews that can speak up against it. I actually think that's impactful.
In my line of work, I encounter so many anti-Zionists, anti-Semites who pull out the good Jew card. And this is what you are presenting yourself as the good Jew, and I am the bad Jew. And it's a very, very dangerous game you're playing, because you're basically going to the and this is my perspective of this, obviously, you're going to the anti-Semite, look, those Jews over there, they're the evil ones, they're the warmongers. Ignore all the context, ignore the fact I might be wrong in my analysis, ignore all of that, they're the bad guys. Me, I'm a good Jew. And there's other Jews that think just like you. We also don't like these bad Jews over there. So just separate us, and let's go after the Zionists are evil, and those anti-Zionists, we're the good Jews. And it's a very, very dangerous game to play. I don't think we should ever be in the business of trying to appease anti-Semites, and that's exactly what you're creating token Jews, effectively. We're the good ones.
But that's not, I mean, that's a very specific framing. Let me present it from with a different group. When we see Muslims talking about reforming Islam and denouncing violence in Islam, are they just trying to be, and again, you do have examples. I would say Yosef Haddad and Mossab, you could call them token Muslims, token
I mean, Yosef
Palestinians.
Haddad's not a Muslim; he's Christian.
Christian,
But
okay, token Palestinian. But yeah, but then you have others that they're, let's say Ihab Hassan, for example, right? He is definitely a
also
Palestinian.
Christian. But yeah, let's say
Yeah, no,
Arab.
okay, fine. So I'm changing the example Muslims to Palestinians, right? People like Ihab and Ahmed Khatib and these Palestinians that will criticize Israel, but also criticize Hamas, that does something in the minds of Jews. They're not just a token Palestinian; they're actually changing Jews' minds because many of us were like, "Where are all the good Palestinians? Where are the ones condemning Hamas?" So that radicalizes us, and we see examples of these people rising up and actually making a difference. So I think there's a difference between being a token and just being a person of your group with integrity that can honestly criticize the side you come from.
So I I understand the arguments. I think it, particularly with the Jewish people, it's a very dangerous game to play, and I don't like making comparisons to World War II. It's a terrible place to be. But look, we're the good Jews. We're the German. We're we're just like you. We're not these backwards religious peasants. And it always backfires. And I think particularly with what you're doing, it endangers, because we were saying before about truth is very important, and you put out a message that say, let's, I mean, you said the civilian to militant death toll could be 8 to 1.
Mhm.
But I think, did you just say between 4 to 1 and 8 to 1? Is that what you said?
Between 4 to 1 and even 9 to 1, yeah.
Okay,
That's
4 to 1 and 9 to 1. But that's
mhm.
pure speculation. It's pure
Yeah, I mean,
speculation on your part. And if it's true, that's not a great place for Israel to find itself if it's 9 to 1. If it's false, and you've put out this message to however many, so I don't know however many, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people may have consumed that information from you, that endangers Jews, that endangers Israel, and it's not correct. And so you're in trying to present yourself as the good Jew, you endanger many other Jews with pure speculation.
so first of all, I reject that I'm trying to present myself as the good Jew, right? I don't do what I do to be loved by anybody. I don't think that, people say, oh, it doesn't matter how much you suck up to them, they'll still kill you. Like that's not a consideration. Without getting too much into like my world philosophy, I do the work I do because I want to have an impact. It also gives me meaning. I can't engage in this work without being as honest as possible. Sometimes I feel like I'm too honest to a fault. So if I believe that it's between 4 to 1 and 8 to 1, based on an analysis I've done, it's not pure speculation. It's based on data. Then if I can't find the ability to say that, then I might as well not do this at all. I might as well just stay home and not be involved. But if we get to the point, let's say I say something that demonizes Israel and I'm wrong about it, the most activists would have also been wrong about it. Most of them were not going to issue corrections, whereas I will always issue a correction. So again, those who do follow me because of the anti-Israel stuff I did will also be exposed to future corrections had I made a mistake. But we I understand what you're saying, the whole concept of good Jew, but like, can't you understand why people who are seeing atrocities being committed daily and seeing virtually, not virtually, but very few Jews speaking out against it, how that's going to contribute to anti-Semitism? Like, very
If
clearly, it seems like that would fuel anti-Semitism.
if atrocities were being carried out every day, yes, but I obviously don't believe that's the case. Otherwise, I wouldn't do what I do. I believe every morning there is tragedy. Every day you open up X, you open up whatever newspaper you read, and you're greeted with more horrific stories from Gaza. And those stories are very real, and there is real tragedy. That's not the same thing as an atrocity. And what you're doing, you're attributing blame to Israel, because that's clearly what you believe. You believe Israel is carrying out these atrocities. And if you get something wrong, if you retract that 2 weeks later, the damage is already done. The amount of times the mainstream media runs with a story and then 2 weeks later, little footnote, we got it wrong, doesn't matter, the damage has been done. And that's one of the main reasons I actually haven't put out another video on the latest Gaza death toll. With every release, I made a video. I analyzed the data. I used AI to validate the IDs. I did all my way beyond. I'm a boomer. I can barely use technology. I had AI decoding JavaScript and translating into an Excel formula to interrogate the data, and I'm not confident in the ratios I was putting out. I don't know if it's 1-to-1. I don't know if it's 1 to 1.5, 1 to 2. I believe the civilian to militant ratio is very low, particularly given, and I can say with absolute certainty, given the nature of how densely populated Gaza is, Israel must, and coupled with the amount of munitions and and just sheer tonnage of explosives that have been dropped on Gaza. I think is the latest estimate 70 or 80% of the buildings by the United Nations are either damaged or destroyed.
Yeah.
We haven't seen anything like that in terms of the percentage of the population, thank God, that's been destroyed. We haven't seen 60, 70, 80% of Palestinians that were living in Gaza killed, because Israel has gone to great lengths to make sure that civilians weren't in those buildings when they engaged Hamas in those areas.
Wait, but I'm not sure why you would conclude that it's low. I mean, you could conclude that there's an effort to not maximize civilian harm, but if you consider the fact that Gazans can't leave Gaza, which is very unique. Most other violent conflicts, the population is able to leave. Gazans can't leave. It's very heavy, densely populated, and Hamas is in a tunnel city under Gaza. So the massive amounts of bombardments we're doing are going to disproportionately harm civilians more than other similar bombardments in other countries. So not only are we bombing more, we're
But
evacuating
they're not.
less. Well, no. In terms of the total amount of bombings,
The bombing's more, but the casualties are less. So take Syria in 2014. You had 110,000 people killed in 1 year, and the next year was almost as many. Israel is fighting in a far more densely populated area, exactly as you described.
Wait, but so Joseph, real quick, just on the Syria thing, because Syria is not the example you want to make, because let's put civilian and combatant aside because we don't have all the information. Let's just look at child deaths. Children in Gaza are dying at a rate of 40 times higher than Syria.
What percentage of the population is under 18 in Syria, and what percentage of the population is under 18 in Gaza?
It's no, wait. It's actually not all too different. They also have a very young they have a very young population, not as young, but they have a young population. But again, we're talking 40x. It's just orders of magnitude more. There's been no conflict in the 21st century that has this rate of children dying. So
and
it's
there's
not.
one simple reason for that. Well, there's two simple reasons for that. One is Hamas brought a war to a densely populated area with a very young population.
That's
and
fine.
two,
We can talk about the why,
the second
but
thing was exactly what you raised. The border was sealed. That doesn't change the fact that Israel has to respond. And so Israel has responded in a way where the death toll is a fraction of the percentage of buildings that have been destroyed, a fraction. So we've not seen 60 to 70 to 60 to 80% of Palestinians living in Gaza killed. Thank God we haven't seen that. But we haven't seen that, which shows there must be some precautions being taken by Israel. Otherwise, you can't inflict that level of damage.
I wouldn't deny that for a moment. I think I would say a lot of the buildings that are being destroyed are empty or have very few people in them. But that's not like
So
that's not the way
perfect. How do they come to have no people in them?
because they're evacuated.
And who's evacuating them?
Israel.
So what Israel's intention is not to maximize civilian
Wait,
casualties,
but no,
clearly.
I think there's a different argument. If there are people saying that Israel is trying to maximize civilian harm, that's just not reflected in the data. But the case that Israel is engaging in a way that is causing less civilian harm than comparable conflicts, that's just like demonstrably not true. That the
Okay,
data
so
is just.
to that point, can you point to another conflict where the one side has taken the same sort, they've gone to the same lengths, making millions of phone calls, dropping millions of flyers, creating maps and safe zones, humanitarian corridors, almost 2 million tons of aid.
So the precaution Israel takes is to some extent a result of either other precaution they're not taking or an increase of aggression. So other countries do evacuations. Assad did evacuations, Putin did evacuations. But the reason why Israel does more roof tapping and leaflets than other countries is because they destroy a lot more civilian infrastructure. You don't drop leaflets if there's militants you want to kill. You drop leaflets if it's only. So the fact that we do more leaflets and roof tapping is only because we destroy more civilian infrastructure.
But that's because obviously because of the urban nature of this conflict. If Hamas are engaging with, as you described, a huge underground network, you need large explosives, bunker busters to hit those tunnels. If you're engaging in densely built up areas with multiple vantage points that would make your troops vulnerable, you have to limit those. So, for instance, before they go into Gaza, initially they'd shell a neighborhood. They would be firing from the Israeli side, from wherever, to soften it before moving the ground troops in. And so these are just precautions that Israel will make to minimize the risk of its own troops being harmed, while also minimizing the risks to civilians. As a consequence, giving Hamas a heads up, giving whichever militant faction they're engaging with the opportunity to either lay an ambush or escape. So Israel is doing that at its own detriment. A great cost. Like, nobody wants to lose the element of surprise in a conflict. It's the last thing you want to do. Yet Israel is doing it repeatedly to preserve civilian life. And so to bring it back to how we got to this is why I feel what you do does pose a real danger, because what you're doing is you strip out all this context and then you make wild speculations which spread to this narrative that Israel is this demonic genocidal state, which it just clearly is not. There's to say that Assad was doing the same as what Israel is doing in Gaza is just insane. Assad was a butcher. He was not preserving civilian life. He was butchering civilians. Israel is going to great lengths to minimize
No,
civilians.
that's the thing. I genuinely, this is not me just being hyperbolic. I genuinely believe Netanyahu is a far worse war criminal than Assad, and I believe that what Israel is doing in Gaza is far worse than than the Syrian civil war. And I don't support. I'm not an
How
Assadist.
many died in the Syrian civil war?
In the Syrian civil war, around 50% were combatants,
Okay, so remove those. How many civilians?
a few 100,000. But if you look
How many? How
proportionate to
many? How many have
a
died?
few 100,000. Wait, hold on. But if you look proportionate to population size and duration of the war, civilians are dying at a much low. We're dying at a much lower rate in Syria than in Gaza. Gaza surpassed Syria in pretty much every metric available. So we could talk about the conditions that make Gaza unique, but it's two separate conversations. One is the conditions that make you unique. The other is the toll, and and the the this the conditions being unique doesn't absolve Israel of responsibility. I'll give an analogy. If right now there's a hostage situation in a school, right? Let's just say in America, there's a hostage situation in a school. The fact that there's hostages in a school or hostage takers in a school is a consideration the US government needs to take when dealing with these hostage takers. And if those hostage takers were to decide to level the school with everybody in it, you can't, like, it wouldn't be a justifiable excuse to say, yeah, but it was tough conditions. We didn't want to lose our own. Bomb a school. So it's true. It's tough conditions. There's a tunnel city under Gaza. But that's for that reason, because Hamas has where to go, and because we didn't do proper evacuations, the strategy of mass bombardment and flattening Gaza is exceptionally cruel. Had we done massive evacuations out of Gaza, which is what we should have done, if we wanted to take the military route, which I don't think, I think there's other routes, but if we want to take the military route, massive evacuations, and then you have a completely different situation. But right now, civilians have nowhere to go. Hamas is hiding, and we're just bombing civilians. Like this dynamic
Sorry,
alone should,
just to pick, because I agree
Mhm.
there should have been mass evacuations
Yeah,
out of Gaza. I'm not
that's
saying
huge.
forced
Like that's
displacement.
huge.
I'm saying the border should have been open so they could leave. Practically, how do you suggest that, how is Israel at fault for that?
Well, again, the warring party, if you're gonna drop bombs on cities and there's civilians there, that's your consideration to take.
Okay,
And
so
and
just
there's just
practically, where did they go? Via where?
we should we,
Uh,
we, we should have built a massive refugee camp in the Negev if we
So
couldn't
you're
find them.
saying the solution to October 7th is just to move this hostile population that you're at war with, and the overwhelming majority of Palestinians in Gaza do not see Israel as their friend, into your own territory. That's your practical solution.
So no, actually, I would propose a non-military solution, but I know that that's very unpopular and hard to convince people just how we're wired in the state of the world today. But yes, I would have moved women and children and elderly as well as military age men that pass test into a massive refugee camp if I wanted to engage in a military operation. But there's other things we could do, like in addition to the evacuation. There's also like level of proportionality. We had whistleblower reports saying that we were killing 20 civilians just to get one mid-level commander, and we had permission to kill up to 100 civilians if it was for a high-level commander. I mean, these are levels of proportionality we have not seen in any other conflict. Like if we want to again compare it to Putin and Assad, which I'm not saying they too are war criminals, George Bush, also war criminal, they did not engage with this level of proportionality. In fact, just one bit of information. Years ago, there was a report that came out about Obama's drone program that came out that said there was a one-to-one civilian to combatant ratio. That was highly, but we're literally allowing we're dropping bombs on buildings that are primarily civilians just to kill one or two militants. Like that's a choice. That's not a necessity. So there's a lot we could do differently. And then there's just the individual war crimes soldiers are committed. But I almost feel like we're getting into the debate we had. I don't want to get stuck on this, so I will give you the word on. We'll open it.
So one thing I would just say, I don't know, I can see all
Mhm.
the comments going crazy. I'm just working out how Discord works. Hostile population. They said it. Israel and Gaza are at war. Israel and the Palestinians have been at war effectively with each other for decades. In consistent polling, these two communities do not get along. Israel is becoming increasingly hostile to Palestinians, particularly post October 7th. So, no, I'm not an ethno supremacist because I recognize that there is a hostile population in Gaza. Every single 80% of Palestinians in the West Bank, the numbers changed in Gaza, support October the 7th and see it as a good thing. This is a hostile population. Our people are at war. People like Adar, and believe it or not, myself, actually want to create peace. We just see very different paths to that, to peace. You see it for appeasement, I see it for strength, but ultimately, I want to coexist with the Arabs in this land. I don't want to see anybody gone. I don't want to. I would support the people in Gaza being able to leave of their own free will to escape a war zone, absolutely. But I'm not for the forced displacement of anybody. I'm not actually an ethno supremacist, as somebody alluded to.
Yeah. So if I won't push back on anything you said, but I will defend against saying that I'm for appeasement. I would say that I actually think it's strength, compassion, and compromises is probably how I would
What,
frame what we need to do.
where's the strength in anything that you've described or anything that you push for?
Well, for example, I'm not calling for taking down all checkpoints on day one and breaking down the border wall. I understand the necessity for security. I don't talk about dismantling institutions that currently keep Jews safe. I talk about transforming these institutions. So if you really here are the
By
solutions.
institutions, are you talking the IDF? What just like
Well, for example, like a lot of anti-Zionists, they, as far as they're concerned, dismantle the state, dismantle the IDF, kumbaya, it'll all work out. Like that's very different from my approach. For me, it's I want the institutions, whether it's the IDF or the government or the courts, to transform into institutions that protect and provide for all the people under it. And if we are scared of a demographic concern for protecting all the people, then we need to allow them to build the institutions that can protect their rights. So, supporting institutions that protect the rights of our people is in itself strength. It's so I object to the fact that just because I don't think flattening Gaza is okay, because I think generally there's almost always a nonviolent take. I could see why that can be framed as weakness, but I don't think it's weakness. In
it's
fact,
never old.
I think that the case could be made that it's more strength because it's not reactionary, it's not reactive, fearful. It's, you know what? You hit me, I'm not insecure. I don't even need to hit you back. I know how strong I am. I'll protect my people next time. You won't do this again. But I don't need to strike back like a psychopathic maniac that's fearing for my life. I would say that display of insecurity that's compensating through a show of strength.
So, but that's it. You said the next time, and 48 would have been that next time. 1929, 1921. At which point do you show that force of strength? This has been going on for
But I mean,
decades.
I don't know. But yeah, sure. And we've had Netanyahu for years who's continuously run on a policy of I'm going to keep you safe. I'm strong. I'm strong. And then we had the worst attack since the Holocaust. So it's like that's what maintenance of the status quo and being strong led to. So I'm not. I don't
Yeah,
think
when are
that.
we gonna stop attacking Bibi and have some Q&A?
Dean, that's a good question about the Q&A. But we kind of gave Bibi this is the first time we mentioned him. Bibi's gotten a pretty he's
You've
gotten a
mentioned him
free
a
he's
couple
gotten a
of
free
times.
pass in this conversation.
You've
But
mentioned him negatively more than the terror groups.
well, it's interesting because as much as I can't wait to see Netanyahu leave leadership for good, and I do think he will be remembered as perhaps the single worst leader in Jewish history. I think there's a high chance that happens. But I actually don't think the next leader is going to somehow be a revolutionary to change the country. So and this is actually a difference in opinion I have with some anti-Zionists. They say we need to get Bibi out of there. They have this idea that that'll change things. It'll change a little bit, but it's not like the next person in line is going to be a revolutionary peacemaker. It'll be more maintenance of the status quo until the U.S. comes. I mean, even like Yair Golan, who's a lefty, even he's more hawkish than what I would have wanted him to be, but maybe he's just hawkish to stay relevant. Anyways, let's get to Q&A. Dean, we'll start with you.
Thank you. So, Joseph, I'm a big fan. I've been watching you for a while. Love what you're doing. I do some of the stuff myself, but I've always inspired by you. I've got this thing. It's called the Abraham School, and you can just write the Abraham School, and I do it in Arabic, and I reach also millions, not as many as you reach, but also reach a lot, and I'm talking about Zionism, and I'm talking about all these things, and I agree with you about a lot of stuff. But I actually wanted to ask you about your approach, because the way I feel, and correct me if I'm wrong, many times you're attacking Islam in its entirety. Uh,
I
yeah,
just
we're
gave you a
friends now.
follow.
Awesome. And I was gonna ask you, do you maybe think it's maybe would be more accurate to attack the Islamists and sort of give way to the Muslims who are against the Islamists? Because it feels like many times you're attacking all of it. What do you think of that?
I've been on a bit of a journey myself. I used to be very much. I used to think our religions were so comparable, so similar, that if only Muslims understood how close they were, we'd get on fine. And then it dawned on me, like maybe 5 years into this worldview, after investing a huge amount of time studying Islam, studying the Quran, Hadith, the Sunnah, that actually Shia and Sunni have way more in common than Jews and Muslims, and they've been slaughtering each other for centuries. And so commonality isn't enough for peace. However, I also disagree with how you framed what I do. My issue isn't with Islam. In fact, a huge proportion of my audience are Muslims. And I think if you were to speak to our ancestors, or my ancestors certainly living in Europe, Jews living in Europe 500 years ago, and told them in 500 years' time, do you know who the closest friend of the Jews is going to be? The Christians. They would look at you like you were insane, because at that point the Christians were ripping our flesh from our bodies while we were still breathing. And today, the Protestant, the denomination certainly, is incredibly, particularly those that came out of school that was born in England, are incredibly close to the Jewish people. And I think the same will happen within the Ummah. I think there will be a sizable number of Muslims. I'm assuming from within the Sunni belt, but maybe from the Shia, who knows, that will draw close to the Jewish people, and solid relationships will be built, and you will have, I think, like you have Christian Zionism, you will have Muslim Zionism. Not at the expense of any Arabs living here, but they will just support the Jews' right to live in this land as Jews and not as Muslims and not as one of the Dhimma. So as equals. And I think a strategy that many Jews take is absolute suicide. Forget the morality of it. Like, I think it's immoral to go to war with Muslims as a collective. I think that's a stupid thing to do. It's immoral. But it's also dumb. There's 2 billion Muslims in the world. Why are you picking a fight with 2 billion people when you're 15 million strong? And so I think it's much better to build bridges and strong relationships. However, that said, I still think we should speak out against anti-Semitism within Islam. I think we should still speak out against how we existed, how we lived historically under the Khilafah, under the different caliphates, how we were, as one of the Dhimma, we were oppressed. Even the taxation system was designed as a tax of humiliation. And so there's no shame. We can't have a we can't have a future together if we're not able to talk about the injustices of the past. Because if we lie and we build our friendship on lies, it's going to deteriorate. It's going to break down. So I believe that we should be building strong bridges with the Ummah, with the Muslims. However, we should also call out anti-Semitism within their history, within the Muslim world today, and within their traditions, within scripture. And they will find answers that are much more satisfactory. So a great example is many Muslims will tell you that Jews descend from apes and pigs. And how that's interpreted will be either you're all apes and pigs, which is the Hamas line, or you'll have others that'll say it's talking about Jews that don't keep the Sabbath, and it's talking about particular Jews at this point. And so the Muslim community themselves will arrive at answers that satisfy them and allow them to have relationships with us as equals rather than us being subordinate and under Islam. And so that's my main thing. I want to be equal. I don't want to be under Islam anymore.
Do you think of putting Arabic subtitles? Because a lot of them do not know English.
Yeah, yes. I've thought long and hard about doing an Arabic channel. However, I'm a one-man show. It's called A Movement. It's basically just me. I don't have the resource at the moment to do that.
Joseph, in a few years, AI solutions will allow you to do all that stuff. So just sit tight.
We can connect, and also you could learn Arabic. But yeah, cool. I don't want to take.
I have a question.
Thanks.
Thank you, Dean. Altoids, all you.
So I have a question for both of you, Joseph and Adar. And Joseph, just quickly, I like many of the videos you've done. I haven't followed much after October 7, but I like the pre-October 7 videos more. Anyways, so Adar, we spoke before about this specific topic that he was so entrenched in speaking today, and it's the topic that some things that you may or may not say can be perceived within our community as a way to fuel attacks against the Jewish community. Because there's one thing that we need to understand that there's a war, correct? And a lot of the things during the war itself can be categorized as propaganda. So how can you told me before, I think it was like a month ago that we had this conversation. It was it wasn't the Abiba family, the conversation I remember.
Mm-hmm.
That if we go and jump the gun and like just start making direct accusations of things that may look like direct accusations, it can only make people on our side mad, but it can also justify people who may not like Jews. But you said that you were going to think about it and research on it and try to like reflect. So, what do you think about a month after about this, and specifically because he presented this point, and I think he just spent like 20 minutes on it.
Wait, yeah, what point specifically are you asking if I reflected on?
Their point of using numbers or conclusions before we have conclusive evidence during the war, or
Mm.
before, after the war, before the end of the war.
So I think that there's I think it really depends on what. Like, do I regret putting out the analysis of the cause of death of the Bibas family? I don't, and I know it was controversial and triggering, but that's not something that we will ever. Israel's never going to admit the truth on that. And in my opinion, if I could do something to change a few minds on that, then I'm going to do it. And the reason I felt compelled to do it, and it maybe if I could go back, I would have waited a week, because after a week I was more certain. It ended up being that no information came out, which decreased my certainty. My certainty has increased over time, just because there was no verification, not by anybody, not by Israeli forensics, not by any third party, not by U.S. intelligence even. It's just they went silent on it. They made a claim that, if true and if there was evidence of it, it would be very easy to prove, and that's something you would want to prove and let the whole world know. Very easy ways to prove it. It just they made a claim, and then kind of just shut up about it because they had no way to verify it. Now, one of the reasons why I was hasty in jumping on that is I feel, I don't want to call it guilt, but almost regret as to not doing more to combat what I consider to be atrocity propaganda after October 7th. And there's a few reasons for this, but if I'm to speak purely from like a more self-interested place, October 7th was horrific and deeply, deeply traumatizing for people. It's something that no people should experience. And I was pained by the fact that what I saw Israel do was, if I'm to use an analogy, October 7th was us getting stabbed in the stomach. And Israel, instead of removing that knife and helping the wound heal, they twisted the knife. And the reason they twisted the knife is so they could tell the world, look what they did. They stabbed you in the stomach and twisted the knife. It was increasing the pain of our people for nothing more than PR gain, and to justify then killing other people. So I just was so troubled by it that I said, if I see this happen again, I'm gonna jump on the opportunity and do something about it. So while the backlash I got definitely takes some kind of a psychological toll, I actually sleep better at night knowing that I did my small part in raising awareness about what I believe to be a far more plausible hypothesis.
Can I just jump in there? Because one of my, I think this is my, listening to what you're saying, I think this is my frustration with your approach to division. I don't know how to describe what you do, but you are as bad faith as you can be when it comes to Israel, and as charitable as you can the other way around. So I saw, for instance, I saw your thing on the 50 beheaded babies, and you posted a clip. I didn't watch the clip, so I'm assuming that Jonathan Cohn-Nicholas does actually say.
Well, he didn't. No, he didn't say 40 beheaded babies. He says we have confirmations that babies beheaded. Yeah.
And okay, so I thought you were saying that he said that, but what I was going to say is still rings true. Is in the fog of war. So I know these people. I know many of the spokespeople for the idea. The fog of war is real, and they're just like we're trying to make sense of what's happening in a rapidly shifting landscape. They are, and they will refine. So the latest example being the ambulance convoy. There's two ways you can read what Israel's initial response was when it said that the vehicles were approaching without their lights on. Is that Israel was deliberately presenting a false narrative to try and deceive the world, or something else happened. Maybe, which is one of the things that has been said, maybe potentially a soldier had lied to their line of command, and now that's going to be investigated. Or maybe it was the first ambulance, because there was multiple ambulances that passed through.
So why bury them? Why bury them? Why bury them in a hole and cover it? If it was simply that.
Yeah, again,
the covering up would require a fair bit of people to be involved in that process. Again, we don't know how high.
Just to that point, just to address that. So on the 23rd, the convoy was obviously hit, and what Israel then say they instantly did was they coordinated with the UN where the burial site was. They marked the grave and informed the UN of the burial site. There were then multiple attempts to reach that. I think on the 28th they actually passed through, but there was multiple attempts to reach that burial site. If you're trying to cover up what happened, why would you then tell them where the grave site is? But anyway, my point isn't to get into the details. My point is, and this is exactly it, you can either take a bad faith or a charitable reading of what's been said. And Adar, with you, whatever paints Israel in the negative light, that's where you go. 9-to-1 death ratio, that's where you go. Israel deliberately murdered medics and covered them up. And I know you haven't said that. This is the gentleman that was just speaking there. But you will get the Bibas family. You will go to the worst case, and you always are as uncharitable as you can possibly be with your own people, and as charitable as you can be with those that seek the destruction of your people.
So why do you keep identifying Adar and his
That's
without actual?
Real quick. I'm grateful that people here want to defend me, and we can all share soon. But I think that a lot of it comes down to vantage point, right? Because when I put out an analysis that I think this was months ago, that I said the death toll I think is anywhere between 40,000 and 100,000 when you account for indirect deaths and those unaccounted for. But there's many in the pro-Palestine camp that say that I'm now diminishing the numbers of thousands. So they also think that they would perceive me being charitable to Israel and just an agent of Zionism. So often how I'm perceived depends on someone's vantage point. So I don't know if I'm completely uncharitable to one side and charitable to the other. What I'll say is I generally try to be charitable to people and uncharitable to institutions, right? I think I don't like to demonize people. I don't like rhetoric that paints people in a certain way. But when it comes to institutions, I think we should criticize and hell, even demonize institutions to completely change them. So I would say that's my approach. So when I'm criticizing the IDF, I'm not criticizing Israeli people. In fact, you know, if you see my writing, I'll often say I don't blame Israelis for seeing the world the way they see. All people in their shoes would. Even if you read my post yesterday about the ambulances, I said, I know you might feel hate for Israelis, but just remember, if you were in their shoes, you would see the world as they do. Like, that's very intentional language. So yeah, I'm very uncharitable in a sense towards the IDF in Israel, and for any crime they commit, but I'm not going to do that to people. So I think that's one distinction that's important to make, and also just recognize that many Palestinians and pro-Palestinians think I'm being charitable to Israel because I'm not taking extreme stances to the other side as well.
Would it be
So-
fair to say that you are more critical of Israel and the IDF than those that seek to murder you and kill you? Other people that
I think because fundamentally it's important to be self-critical before you criticize others and try to change the state before you criticize others. I think seeing like an Israeli criticize Palestinians falls on deaf ears. The last thing Palestinians need is just another Israeli telling them why they're bad and why they need to change. I think it's better, and I hope to inspire others, but I want more Palestinians to criticize their own. I want more Israelis to criticize their own. I think the world would be a better place if we do that. So yes, I'm more critical towards Israel.
Adar,
that's where we depart.
Adar, with
Because
all
when
fairness,
someone's got a knife
your
to my
criticism.
throat, 2 minutes, and then you can jump in. When someone's got a knife to my throat, that's not the time for me to self-reflect. For me, my instant, when someone's got a knife to my throat, I'm focused 100% on getting the knife away from my throat. And then once I've got the knife away from my throat, maybe I can question why I got there. Why did I put myself in a dangerous situation? Is there something I could have done differently? But when the knife's to your throat, that's not the time to be self-critical.
The knife was on the throat on October 7th. When Adar, listen, I've been following Adar for many years now, okay? So Adar's criticism of Israel was not as strong as it is today. And the reason why it wasn't as strong is because Israel wasn't committing the amount of atrocities that it is today. So if you go back to Adar before October 7th, was he critical of Israel? Yes, to some degree he was, just as he was critical of, and he's criticized me as a Palestinian many times. But the point is that we have events right now that are happening because of this war, and you can't give me this thing, the knife is at our throat. Israel is not in a position of vulnerability against the Palestinians at this time. Quite the opposite. And you're talking about an army of pathological liars who lied yesterday about killing a 14-year-old American citizen and Tormos Haya yesterday, who lied about the attack when settlers beat up the Bilal, I can't remember his name, the filmmaker who won the Oscars for the documentary. The army in their reports, the army put terrorists were throwing rocks. This is the cover story that they've used for years against us. Okay.
There are numerous Israelis, particularly from the settler movement, that are in jail for offences against Palestinians. How many Palestinians are jailed by the PA for offences against Israelis? Or Hamas, even more?
You want to talk about
how many
done against extremists? Hey, first of all, you can never compare the conviction rates that these Jewish terrorists get in the West Bank. The PA is very well known to go against their own people. The PA went to Jenin before the Israeli invasion and went into Jenin to get rid of the militants, and they lost PA policemen, and they even killed other militants. They've killed their own people to go after their extremists. They don't let their extremist terrorists run around the West Bank rampaging and then taking cover.
PA trying to hold on to power.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is they've taken the initiative to defend them. So anyways, I want to go back to something that you said. You said, first of all, your work is crap. And before October 7th, I used to watch your stupid videos. You're a grifter. And I actually agree with Dean, who I usually don't agree on anything about your trashy work. You are confrontational. You go to those parks in London where you have a bunch of losers.
But let's not do the personal attacks.
Yeah, but this guy is gonna sit here and say.
No, he can personally attack you.
I'm gonna tell you because you said the dhimmi tax is a tax of the. First of all, I live. My house in East Jerusalem, I'm paying Arnuna. Do you know what Arnuna is? Do you know what it is? Yes.
Arnuna?
No, I'm asking this guy, the Arnuna. Yeah, what is it?
Arnuna, yes, I know Arnuna. I don't know what Arnuna you pay. I live here as well. I'm in Jerusalem as well, mate.
Okay, I pay it, so therefore it's occupied. So okay? We pay taxes because it's a property tax, correct? It's the property tax that we have to pay to the municipality because of the garbage in the streets, which, by the way, are sucking our neighborhoods. Anyways, but the point is that the dhimmi tax.
Which neighborhood are you in? I can tell you where I am. Let's not, because there's.
Anyways, no, let's move on. So my point is that when you point this thing about saying that the dhimmi tax is a humiliation tax, it was a tax just like on all citizens. Israel taxes its Palestinian citizens, don't they? Don't they?
Yes. So let's open up. Let's do a little.
But what I'm just trying to tell you is how you terminology stuff. Okay, but I don't want to get into the further debate. And about the
question. I'm going to respond to what you just said.
No, it wasn't a question. I was just explaining to you.
The difference between Arnona and the jizya is the Quran explicitly says in chapter 9, verse 29, that the tax is a tax of humiliation. It's a tax to humiliate the people, al-Kitab, the people of the book. There is
No,
no
that's
tax
anyway.
to humiliate
Anyway,
the Arabs. The Arabs in Israel pay the
twist it
same
the
tax
way
as
you
the
want.
Jews.
Twist it just as how you want. You pay taxes for protection.
No,
The
no,
other thing is,
do you not see? Imagine, brother. Okay,
I'm not going to sit
imagine
here
if
and
we
debate
tax
theology with you,
Palestinians
buddy.
as
Anyway,
much
so
as
let me
tax.
go back to something you said more about this issue.
You can't open up a question and then run away from the answer.
It was a
You
question.
put out the
It wasn't a-
case. Let me respond, and then we can move to the next point.
Listen,
Just a moment.
Yeah. So
You,
come on,
you, you, you
Joseph.
you said
You're
one
gonna turn
moment.
it
Just
into
let him do it. You said chapter
guys,
9, verse 29.
guys, here's what we're gonna
Chapter
do.
9, verse 29. Sagirun.
Yeah, but the more important.
Joseph, you can give the response you wanted, Justin, then make the other, then
Okay.
open it up
So
to.
my point is very simple. We pay the same tax. The more money we earn in Israel, the more tax we pay. The neighborhood we live in will determine different taxes as well. But that's complete. It's not based on your religion. If Israel enforced a tax on Muslims, a Muslim-only tax which had no limit and was there to humiliate Muslims, I would say that's abhorrent. That's the only thing I was saying. Jizya is not a tax of protection, it's a tax of humiliation, and I would be against any such tax that Israel implemented against Arabs.
That's fine. It was actually a tax of substitute because you don't pay zakat, but that's okay. Let's move on.
The point is tiny in comparison.
The point is, so you mentioned about the right wing in Europe.
But you're wrong.
Okay.
Read Ibn Kathir. Read the Tafsir of Ibn Kathir.
Okay, so let me ask you something. So you mentioned about the right wing
Justin,
and how.
Real quick, Justin, just because I need to hop off. Joseph, can you stay on longer?
I can stay on longer. Yeah.
Okay, so Beata, can you take the lead?
We can take care of it. We can take care of it.
Yeah, I'm worried shit's gonna. Okay.
No, but
Well,
the thing is,
all good.
Adar, give me a minute.
Good luck,
Adar,
comrades. Joseph,
Adar, give me a minute before you jump off.
Okay,
Take a minute.
Fine. Yeah.
Okay, because I wanna touch on something that was more related to the subject. What Joseph said about the right wing. Are you familiar with what's his name? Shit. Amichai Chikli. He's the Minister of Diaspora Affairs. So you're sitting here giving me this sob story about right wings and extremists, Candace, someone's. Yet this minister invites a bunch of. Where was your prime minister? Where was the Israeli prime minister just 2 days ago? He was visiting the most right wing leader of Europe, Hungary. Okay, and then Amichai Chikli has an so-called anti-Semitism forum, and who does he invite? Jordan, what is his name? Bardello. Okay, because why? Because Marie Le Pen had legal problems. So he wants to bring the descendants of Nazis to Jerusalem for an anti-Semitic, and he uses the excuse, yeah, we don't forget about them, but we have to align with them. And you know what? You're in London. You're going to be the first victim of these right-wing people when they take power, because when they're finished with Arabs and Muslims, who do you think they're going to come after? And this is the policy, the stupid, reckless policy that the state of Israel follows, aligning with the wrong people that eventually comes and bites them in the ass later.
I want to see Israel make peace with the Palestinians. Hajimin al-Husseini was a Nazi, not just a Nazi collaborator, one of their highest paid officials. He literally tried to set up death squads. And guess what, Habibi? I want to make peace with you too. I think we have to move forward. And we have to face people.
You don't make peace based on your. Listen, dude.
Anyways,
you
guys,
told Adar last time.
You
told Adar last time, and he busted you in a lie when you told him that you saw the babies in the ovens when you went to the south of Israel. You're a propagandist liar.
I'm the recording after. Well,
I never ever said I saw the babies in the ovens.
You did. You told them.
I saw them with my own eyes.
Yeah, you saw them. This is something he said. He said it with Adar.
I saw the press screening. And I visited the site of the massacre.
Sure. Yeah. Anyways, keep on grifting, buddy.
Yeah. Can we refrain from the personal attacks? It seems like the same person is the one always making personal attacks.
I'm thick-skinned.
But the thing is, this Joseph will come and tell you, I used to be all pro peace, and then October 7th changed my mind. You were exactly the person you were before October 7th.
I've never said that.
Go see the Sulha streaming. Go see the Sulha stream that you did with Adar, and you will see what I'm saying.
When have I said I used to be pro-peace until October 7th? I say I'm still pro-peace. Like, you don't have a clue what my message has made.
No, you said your position changed, and it didn't
My
change. It's
position's
been the
changed in
same
terms of
thing.
two-state solution. And I said
You
then
just
I don't know what it is, and I still don't know what it is.
very well.
Yeah, I think we're all passionate about the subject, but we're able to contain ourselves even with people we don't disagree. So let's just take a chill pill, everybody, please. Joseph, we appreciate you being here. By the way, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
Yeah, but even Dean mentioned how his videos are just like so when he
It's
touches
enough.
on the subject.
Justin,
And Dean is a right winger. I mean, if
it's
he even
useless,
could
man.
call it.
It's useless. Let us go back to something that you said, Joseph. And you mentioned again to chapter 9, verse 29. Am I correct in the Quran?
Yes.
So
Yes.
to chapter 9, that will be Surah Al-Anfal. Verse 29, that would be also in Surah Al-Anfal, and that would be on page 180. Literally, it doesn't even speak about what you're saying. In
So
English,
I'm
it is.
This is
I'm
what he
just
always
pulling it
does.
up
He's gonna
now.
pull up. And then where does it say that Jews are
No,
descendants
no,
of
no.
pigs and apes?
Just
No, what I'm saying, he's making these claims.
Justin. One
Where does
moment,
it
man.
say?
I gave
No,
you
no, I
time to
want to know.
think. Justin, let me speak to him. Maybe he just like.
No, but Biara,
Yeah.
he's saying
No.
claims that
I have my phone with me as well.
Khalas. Let me just
Justin.
read, and then you can tell me if I've got this wrong. I'm going to read in English, and then you can go through the Arabic, and we can do that.
No. Just I have it in English as well. Just tell me the number and the chapter and the
9:29. So the chapter is how do I do this? Read full surah. My Arabic isn't good enough, but let me.
It's there in English as well.
No. So just go Quran.com 9. Quran.com /9/29. That will give the ayah and the chapter.
So Quran.com okay.
Fight those who do not believe in Allah and the last day, nor comply with what Allah and His Messenger have forbidden, nor embrace the religion of truth from amongst those who were given the scripture, I'll look it up, until they pay the jizya, willingly submitting, fully humbled. Humbled, humiliated, belittled. You can translate sagirun however you want. This is the word. Subdued is another translation.
Yeah. So again, so where's the it is, I see it now. Where's the humiliation? Like when Israel subdued Hamas, is it humiliating them?
The Tafsir Ibn Kathir. Read how he understands Sagirun. Sagirun, the final word. Humbled, belittled, subdued, humiliated.
Yeah.
And Ibn Kathir explains it's because we reject the law of Allah, and if we humiliate them and accept Islam, then we won't have the tax of humiliation. It's a tax of humiliation, not protection. The only place that the jizya appears in the Quran is this chapter, this verse.
So again, if that was the case, then we wouldn't have to pay zakat. If the idea of tax in Islam is humiliation,
Zakat is separate. It's a separate. It's completely.
So how it is separate? How it is separate? So
Zakat,
we as Muslims we pay zakat. Let me speak.
Okay, sorry.
I wasn't interrupting you. I wasn't interrupting you like others does. I'm giving you time to speak, so please also give me time to speak. So again, the zakat is only paid by Muslims, and the also when it comes to the jizya, it is only levied on those who don't involve ourselves in the Muslim armies as well. If you actually look at multiple instances, the jizya weren't paid by Jews and Christians alike in, for example, the era of Umar ibn Khattab. So the idea of the Levite tax of jizya is only a something. It's even like if you compare the percentages, it is a minuscule amount of the zakat. So for you to say that this is a part of humiliation in Islam is totally different. The term sagharun in Arabic means small, and small here means that someone is big and someone is small. But there is a winner and a loser. It doesn't mean any aspect or doesn't contain any aspect of humiliation. Please
So
go
what I
ahead.
would encourage you to do is read accounts from Jews. So the Cairo Geniza is one of the best examples we have of the conditions that Jews lived in when they were living under Muslims. We have hundreds, thousands of letters and books that were written and stored in this Geniza. This too, Jews aren't allowed to throw away text that has the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on, and so we have to destroy them in a fitting way. So they're buried, or they're kept in a Geniza in the case in Egypt. And so for centuries, we have the letters, the books that were all stored in this Geniza, and they document the appalling conditions that Jews lived under when living, when paying the jizya. It was applied to women, it was applied to the poor, it was applied to everyone. The point about it being protection or it being exempt from the army is not true. For instance, when the Jews went to Al-Andalus, when the Muslims went to Al-Andalus, the person who led the army from the Maghreb into Al-Andalus was a Jew called Ka'ula ibn al-Yahudi. He still paid the jizya. It doesn't matter who you are, you pay the jizya, and it's based on the Quran. Now, I don't know you. I do know Ibn Kathir, and I trust Ibn Kathir when it comes to tafsir more than anyone I'm going to speak to online. I trust what the Quran says rather than what someone will say online. The Quran's explicit. It doesn't mention protection, doesn't mention army, doesn't have a limit. In fact, I challenge anyone on the call to find a hadith which says what the limit is. What you'll find is contradictory hadith of how much the jizya was. One Christian tribe paid 2 dinar, another paid 1 dinar. It's basically how much tax is paid unlike the zakat is determined by the Khalifa. He determines what they pay, and it's not even often him. So within the Ottomans, the Jews who were living in Israel pre-British mandatory Palestine, they were oppressed by the Ottomans, but it was usually the Pasha, the man in between the Sultan and the Jews who were living in the land, who would set the backbreaking taxes on them. But what it isn't is a tax of protection or an exemption from the army or all these things that people will tell you online or to make themselves feel good. The lived experience of Jews was one of oppression, and I trust my sources who were living there, whose letters I'm reading, over people I'll meet in chat rooms online. And that's not, I don't mean that as a disrespect, it's just this was our lived experience of paying the jizya.
So you would take Ibn Kathir as more important than, say, for example, Umar bin Khattab? Is he more important?
Umar ibn al-Khattab.
No.
Yeah, so we can go to Umar ibn al-Khattab and how he ethnically cleansed the Jews from the Hijaz, etc. But all of this is going to be tangent.
But what I'm trying to tell you is you're pulling. See, the problem with you is you pull. Yeah, Umar, you spoke.
Okay. Go ahead.
I'm asking him. So for example, I love the way how he pulls things, like he'll pull Ibn Kathir, which, by the way, most Muslims don't even read him. But I'm just letting you know this. This is something that like Western people like to, Orientalists like to.
Which tafsir would you like to go to? We can go to any of the tafsir on that.
What I'm trying to tell you is, like, if you look at, for example, Umar bin Khattab and how he was, his conduct was. If you look at the fact that 90% of the Jewish population of Europe was wiped out, Muslims had the power to do the same thing, but they didn't. And you're sitting here going to tell me that Jews in the Middle East and these areas, because of jizya and anti-Semitism and stuff, were horribly treated and wiped out. Why did like 90% of them not get killed like they did in Europe? The people that you are now allies with, the people that you people are now allies with in Europe are the ones who annihilated 90% of you guys. And you're sitting here trying to convince the world that we were the ones who were the Nazi-likes. It was Hajj Amin al-Husseini. You're going to pick some guy who was a 20-year-old college dropout that the British put and made him not only the Mufti of Jerusalem, but made him the Mufti of all Palestine. They made up this subject. But because this is, you see, you're picking and choosing, and then you're saying, oh, Muslims believe that all Jews are descendants of pigs and apes. But this is fake.
Can I be really clear with what I say? Because I think my perspective is being twisted. This is not what I believe. What I believe is that Islam and the Quran, the Hadith, are like the Torah and the Talmud, like the New Testament and the Old Testament, the only Testament, in that they can be taken to a good place and a bad place. So I believe that Daesh are true Muslims, and they've taken their interpretation of Islam and taken it to a dark place, and they do evil things, but it's based on Islam. And I think of people that devote their life to chesed, to kindness, supporting the widows, the orphans, and they're doing that purely, again, on the Sunnah. It's a completely authentic teaching of Islam. I think the same within our community. Haredi Jew who hates the state of Israel, and a settler who's living in Hebron are both legitimate interpretations of Judaism. They're authentic. They're both real Jews. And so I believe Islam can be taken to a good and a bad place, just like Judaism can. I think, as a general rule, Jews had a better standard of living under Islam than they did under Christendom. But there were Christian kingdoms that treated the Jews incredibly well, and there were Khulafa that treated the Jews incredibly badly. And it just depends. So the Al-Muhidun in the Maghreb, they slaughtered tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of us. They forced us to convert to Islam, which goes against Islam. But here's a caliphate that was doing that. So if you speak to any Muslim and you say, were the caliphates, were they good for the Muslims? They'll say some were good, some were bad. It was exactly the same for the Jews. Some of them were good, some of them were bad. It depended on which one.
Yeah,
but we were always a second-class citizen. Our testimony was always worth.
But I recommend that you read other people instead of Al-Tabari. For example, Al-Tabari is one. For example, but what I'm saying is, I just feel that you seem to cherry pick the people that you want, and it's like, and if I want to cherry pick, man, I can cherry pick like some people, like you said, I can cherry pick some of these Hebron settlers.
I tell you what, you're in Jerusalem, yeah? You said. We can
Not now, but yeah.
You take me through. You teach me who I should learn. I'll come to you, whichever neighborhood.
I told you. No. I would never meet with you. By the way,
if I may chime in, yeah, two things can be true at the same time, Justin. Jews were treated as second-class citizens in Muslim countries, but at the same time, yes, they were treated better than in Christian countries, and they were not killed. It doesn't mean that one trumps the other.
But the thing is, what the reason why I have a problem with what Joseph stands for and what he does is that he's sitting here, he's complaining about like people like Candace Owens or he sent somebody else, some of these right-wingers who are truly anti-Semitic people. I mean, Candace Owens says some fucking crazy ass shit. So does Rabbi Shmuley. I think he's friends with the rabbi. Are you friends with Rabbi Shmuley? Are you guys buddy?
No.
Oh, okay, good. Okay, anyways. So the point is that, but the thing is that I just cannot see how they reconcile. I could be friends with the president of Hungary. I could be friends with Marie Le Pen. I can be friends with these crazy right-wing people because, now they're anti-Arab, they're pro-Israel. They're letting Israel, slide with this war against Palestine. But the thing is, I'm just questioning, like, this is a reckless policy. It's the nature of politics. It's convenient, but long-term strategy, it is terrible. And it's going to lead to a catastrophe because here it is in America right now. These Trump supporters, okay, are MAGA people who literally, they may hate Muslims, but you want to know something? I just went to I attended a meeting with a Palestinian friend of mine, and there was Jews there, and who were the first people to defend the Jews? We were. And the reasons that one of the Jewish members goes, wow, the Palestinian actually came to our defense before anybody. And it's because I said, sweetie, it's not because of you. It's because of me, because I know that these guys, once they finish with you, they're going to come after me. So I'm doing it for selfish reasons. And I just think that this reckless policy, and like, for example, what you have billions of dollars that are going like from Adelson and these Zionists that are supporting Trump. They are, and now you're seeing it. You're seeing the MAGA people turn more and more anti. Some of the craziest comments coming against Israel right now are not coming from the left. It's coming from these people who are upset with Trump because they feel Trump is being dragged into a war with Iran. And these are the people that this is Israel. Israel is fanning anti-Semitism more than anybody. So if you're worried about anti-Semitism in Europe, it is Israel who's fanning the flames of anti-Semitism more than these Muslims that are coming, these immigrants. What Israel's action does, what Zionists are doing, is they're creating this wave of anti-Semitism that's coming.
So I agree with a lot of what you said, actually, particularly with the right coming for the Jews and it being a temporary alliance. So there's no disagreement from me there. The part I disagree with is Israel's not funding this. So you have anti-Semites who exploit it. They exploit the conflict to advance their own anti-Semitic narrative. So someone like Nick Fuentes is talking non-stop about Israel, not because he loves the Palestinians, but because he hates the Jews. It's the inverse of what you're saying with the right, who you say hate the Muslims. They don't like the Jews. They're the alliances just because they dislike Muslims. Well, it's the same is true for Nick Fuentes and the likes. They are anti-Semites who exploit the conflict. So in both instances, there's exploitation going on, but I disagree that the right has a history of anti-Semitism, and those within it are now exploiting it. And as I said earlier, once Trump's gone, he could very easily be replaced with somebody who is a huge enabler of anti-Semitism. I also agree with what you said about Palestinians, by the way. When I was living in the UK, I often found some of the most vocal defenses of the Jewish people, and even Israel at times, were Palestinians who were living in the West. So it hasn't been my experience here, but we're in the middle of a war, so it's probably not the best time.
Let me tell you, for your information, when Hebron in 1929, how many Jews died in the Hebron massacre?
Off the top of my head, I don't know. Dozens.
It's about 115.
Yeah.
About 115. You know how many were saved by their neighbors?
That I actually don't know, and I'd be interested.
More than 400. More than 400.
And so I give you know that I was speaking to a Yemenite Jew who was living in the UK, an old lady.
But what I'm trying to tell you, is
confirming what you're saying. I'm just adding to what you're saying.
Yeah.
And when the 48 war broke out, she was living in, above Silwan, you have the Yemeni village where the Yemenite Jews lived. They moved to massacre them. It was her neighbours, her Arab neighbours, that rescued her family. And so I've heard many stories like this, and I don't doubt it for a minute what you just said.
Yeah. So I'm just letting you know. So it's not just Palestinians in the West. It's also Palestinians in general, because there's certain day-to-day relationships and stuff and stuff. But
I have a
again,
story myself.
I've been here.
Nick Fuentes, by the way, who I do follow. I follow him, and the reason is I follow him is not because I really like him. I think he's a pathetic piece of shit. But the point is, it's still, I even follow Yishai Fleischer, who I even hate even more. But you got to listen to these people, because they're the ones who are telling you. They're the ones they tell you a lot. But anyways,
you're not following me then, because the
problem with you is your videos. You talk to the dumbest people on the street, and it's like I don't gain anything and I don't lose anything when I watch your videos. So it's like literally, like, at least with Yishai Fleischer, I get an understanding of Israeli politics, because he actually, I think, represents a lot of what Israeli policies are doing. But with you, it's like, like I said, I don't really gain or lose anything if I miss it or watch it. Anyways, the point is that Nick Fuentes at least is honest when he says, like, his pro-Palestinians, like when he's pushed to it, like people will say to me, oh, he's pro-Palestinian, but he's not. He literally said, I don't support the war in Gaza because I don't want Palestinian immigrants from Gaza to move to the United States. This is his reason. Not because he cares about humanity or the lives of them and stuff, maybe, I don't know. But he's saying, it's going to create a migration of people, and they'll probably end up coming to the United States. That's not a pro-Palestinian position.
So just to touch on one thing you said, and it's something that's messed with my head. I've been here for a year now in Jerusalem, and on a day-to-day experience, every interaction I have with Arabs, be they Christian or Muslim, has been incredibly positive. Give or take one or two instances, and those instances revealed something which is it's much bigger. So I'm reading a book at the moment from a guy called Harry Levine, who was a Haganah radio operator in Jerusalem in the 1948 war during the siege of Jerusalem. It's an incredible first-hand account. If anyone can get hold of it, I recommend reading it. And he's describing, just a few days before the Israel declares independence, how he's traveling on a bus with Arabs and Jews in the same way that I've been doing on a daily basis here. And they're having a nice conversation. Everyone's smiling despite there being a war. And then, out of the blue, one of the Arabs who's sitting by him smiles at him and says, "You Jews, you've got 1 year." And then he goes back to cutting his apple with his knife. And then he offers the guy smiles and offers him a piece of his apple. And that's been my experience here. There's coexistence on a daily basis between Jews and Arabs, and everybody gets along, and everybody's very kind and friendly. And it's hard to believe there's even a war at times with how these communities are mixed. But then one thing just blew my mind. When I first arrived at the very beginning, I was making a video overlooking Har Bayit, the Masjid al-Aqsa at the Tayelet near Abu Tor, and I was filming by myself, and a bunch of young Palestinian girls, I think there may be 7 of them, 9 years old, started giggling and laughing because I was like the weird guy making a video by himself. And I told them to be quiet. I said, "Shh, I'm filming." And so they started talking to me in Arabic. I said, "I don't speak Arabic. I speak English." And so they started testing me with words like salam, etc. And then I said, "Look, just speak to me in English, please. I'm not understanding what you're saying." And one of them said, "Where are you from?" So I said, "I'm from England. How about you girls? Palestine." Okay, I hadn't heard that yet because everybody had just been saying Israel, Israel, Israel. I really wasn't, because despite spending so much time focused on the conflict, I hadn't lived here. and I hadn't interacted that much with Jerusalem Arabs, and that surprised me. And then she asked me, one of the girls, so like maybe 9 years old, looked at me and said, "Where are you from?" Sorry, not where you from. But she said, "Are you Yehudi?" And so I just smiled at her, and then she went sakin, and made like a stabbing gesture, and that for me was just like a surreal experience that we like on a day-to-day basis. Everyone's getting along, but there's this background context that there's a war, and there's this macro narrative where these two communities aren't getting along and they aren't existing. And October 7th really cemented that with many within the peace camp, where it became very clear, even within the coexistence world, there wasn't real coexistence. It was a job or a dream. But just, I find it a very depressing place to live. On a one-to-one level, everybody's coexisting and getting along, but there's this macro nationalist narrative, which I don't understand how that bridge is gapped.
The reason why it's not gapped is because, first of all, I'm going to tell you, most Palestinians want you to disappear, just like most Israelis want us to disappear. I will not deny that. I'm not going to tell you that we love you. In fact, I would love for you to disappear. To be honest with you, I'm just being honest with you. Now, what will change minds is that because Palestinians in Jerusalem may have access to better jobs, healthcare system, educational system, and stuff like that, maybe you won't find maybe you'll find people will smile at you, cut an apple for you or whatever you said and all that stuff. Maybe pull out a knife and stab you. But the thing is that you have to understand, at the same time this coexistence is happening, what's also happening is the other side. The land seizures, the settlers, the attacks, the racism, the denial of human rights, equal rights, and stuff like that. And to answer your question, how do you go from there? You have to address the reality, and that's that reality. You go home to your Jewish neighborhood, and everything is fine and everything is good, and those Palestinian children go home to their neighborhoods where they have infrastructure that's bad, where they have maybe brothers or fathers in jail. You have basically no equal rights. And if you and the problem is, we can sit here and do things and talk and be, we can drink tea and eat apples or whatever you want to do for 50 years. But it's not going to make a difference if when I drive home, I have to go through a checkpoint. If I have to deal with some 18-year-old Jewish kid who has a gun and is sitting asking me, why am I going here? Or why am I coming here? It's not going to work. And these realities on the ground have to change. And you can say that October 7th, there's reasons why things like this happen, why things have gotten out of control. It's because we are basically doing insanity. Insanity is when you do the same thing and expect another result. Israel's response is always more military, more oppression, and it didn't get you anywhere for the last 50, 60 years. I don't know why you think it's going to change.
But I think what you said, it for me, it cements the way I kind of view it, in the sense that if take somewhere like Beit Safafa in Jerusalem, so East Jerusalem or Jerusalem neighborhood, an Arab neighborhood, sorry, not East Jerusalem, Jerusalem neighborhood, where the Arabs do very well. They drive nice cars. They have a completely comparable life to me. In fact, many of them have much nicer houses than the one I'm sitting in.
I was going to say they probably live better. Yeah.
Yeah. And if you're saying that we can have all of that and there's still hatred, then how do these communities coexist? They can't. So it's almost like the far right is right. You can't live together.
Beit Safafa is probably the worst example you could use. In fact, I don't think there's more friendly Arabs to Jews than maybe Abu Ghosh. I think the only city that would be more nicer to you than Beit Safafa would be Abu Ghosh.
Yeah.
That's the only city where you can actually go in the middle of the old town and go into a restaurant and find more Jews than Arabs sitting. I don't know if you've been to
Naji. I've been to Beit Safafa. So okay, so let's take
Okay, so yeah, go. Okay, if you're Beit Safafa, it's in 48. Yeah, Abu Ghosh was in Israel. If you ever go to Abu Ghosh,
helped the Jews in the war, in the 48 war. It's been an ally for since the very beginning.
Yeah. And Beit Safafa too, by the way. Beit Safafa was also, half of Beit Safafa was part of 48 area as well. But my point is that if you go to Abu Ghosh, go to the old city. There's inside the very center of the town. There's a restaurant. It's called Naji's restaurant. Matam Naji, Misadat Naji. I've been there a dozen times, and I think every time I've been there, there's been more Jews than there were Arabs. I'm just letting you know. And So I think that kind of tells you what needs to be done. Like why when you go to Nazareth, why when you go to the Galilee, why, I mean, I don't want to say the triangle, because the triangle areas right now are really messed up because of the high crime and drugs and other stuff going on, gang activity. But if you go to the Galilee and stuff, you're gonna find that it's not there. Go to Haifa, go to Jaffa, you're gonna find that. And again, I think it testifies that where you find more restrictions, and in Jerusalem we are getting more hostile. To tell you the truth, Jerusalem, you know, I don't know how old you are, but Jerusalem 15 years ago was a different place than it was today. Jerusalem was a lot more, people were nicer, people were more common now. But now that we've seen more things like housing restrictions, land seizures, you know, people losing their identification and stuff, it's kind of pushing us to the edge. In fact, sometimes I feel people in Ramallah are nicer than people in Jerusalem when it comes to coexistence, because Jerusalem people are kind of literally getting fed up. So to answer your question, that's, again, it goes back to my main point. The reality on the ground, if it doesn't change, then I don't think you're going to get change in mentalities.
But if those realities are changed and those security measures are relaxed, it's inevitable that there will be a rise in terrorism. They're there for a reason. That's the challenge.
I don't want to like dominate here, but I just want to give you an example. Like half my family lives in the West Bank, because we're on the border of Jerusalem. So there's an app called Munessik, before October 7th. So Munessik started to give people tasrih to be able to go to Jerusalem to pray at Al-Aqsa. If you were over 27, you were able to get a, you know, it was so easy. You just did the app in 5 minutes, they give you a thing. And some of the people are in their 30s, even some of the people were in their 40s, and they were getting the access to go to Masjid Al-Aqsa. And these were people who were hardline, like really bad attitude, like just frustrated. They're like, I haven't been to Jerusalem in 10 years. I live 5 kilometers from Jerusalem and I have not been to Al-Aqsa in 10 years. It was getting, you know, but as soon as they were able to get easy access and stuff, you know, I was just observing like how people softened. Things like this softened. I'm not saying you're saying the security things, but the thing is there's certain security things. Like, let me give you a perfect example. If the army in the West Bank was to crack down on those Jewish terrorists that are running around killing and burning trees and crops and even actually burning people, even they've killed people. I think it would make a big difference. So I'm not saying bring down your wall or bring down your checkpoints overnight, but I'm saying take a measure to say, hey, we care about stability, we care about law and order, we're going to stop these settlers, and then guess what? If these settlers do crimes and terrorism, we're going to pick them up and put them in Haifa or somewhere else, get them away from you Palestinians. But that doesn't happen. The army comes, and like the attack that happened in near Muzaffar Yatta, what was the Israeli army's response? They arrested 12 Palestinian men who were attacked by settlers. They didn't attack the settlers. They didn't arrest the settlers. So these are the things that need to happen. So I understand you want security, but guess what? We want security too, believe it or not.
So the genuine question, because I'm aware of many of the incidents that you're talking of, and some of them I believe the settlers. Well, I mean, we like you, we have extremists within our camp. I don't think that's the majority of the settler movement, but there are some on the fringes who are more extreme. But they do get locked up. I mean, we do have people in administrative detention. We have people in jail for crimes atrocious crimes they've committed against Palestinians. And so
you can't compare it, but
I would
the killers of Duma of Burkin, the guy who killed a 19-year-old in Burkin. Not only was he in the hospital getting treatment, he didn't go to jail, but members of the Knesset came to visit him in the hospital to bring him flowers and candy. That's how bad it is. Could you imagine?
So I don't know the particulars of the case.
And then one of the MKs actually went to the United States to raise money for his defense. He never went to jail. The conviction rate against people, you know, people don't even go file complaints anymore because it's not worth it. It's like a 1% conviction rate. So you're going to give me token of people who have been convicted for crimes against Palestinians? It's nothing, buddy, nothing.
So I would agree. I would agree with you that more Palestinians will be detained than Israelis, but that's because, unfortunately, Palestinians and Israelis are at war with each other and have been since '48.
Yeah, but you're saying what's going to change the reality? What's going to change the mentality? The mentality will not change If you have this is everything you do good will be like a house of cards. It will just collapse because of the littlest thing. All the
But
good gestures that you're doing to people in Jerusalem, all it's going to take is one home demolition unfairly. All it's going to take is one person getting killed unjustly, and everything will collapse.
but do you think also?
Sorry, go on.
But do you think also the indoctrination, to hate Israelis and Jews in Palestinian society also contributes to this just continuing cycle of hatred? Like Joseph just mentioned, the 9-year-old girls.
Yeah.
Where did they get that notion to stab and kill Jews? I mean, they're 9 years old. I mean,
Yeah.
where did they get that notion?
I don't think listen, there's definitely that, but it's the environment that they grow up in. Okay, most kids, Palestinian kids, don't know Israelis except soldiers and settlers. So imagine if you live in a world and the only Israeli that you see is that Israeli soldier, like if you live in the West Bank, who are you going to see? You're only going to see soldiers at the checkpoint who are yelling at you.
No,
You're
I
gonna
get
see-
that. I get that for Ramallah,
agree
but I
with
don't
you.
get that for Jerusalem. I
Yeah.
understand that way but that's not Jerusalem.
No,
But,
it is Jerusalem. No,
She
it
would
is
be,
Jerusalem.
but
Most
she would
kids,
be,
most
but she
kids in
would be
Jerusalem.
indoctrinated to hate. But she would be indoctrinated to hate soldiers. I mean, Joseph was not in a soldier uniform. She said
Yeah, but
Yehudi.
again, even if you live in East Jerusalem, okay, and I'm telling you this from, like I said, I know. If you're if you're a kid, East Jerusalem is a very segregated city. Your neighborhoods and stuff. There's the schools in Jerusalem are not mixed. The people in Jerusalem do not mix. The only time I see Jews, well, I kind of live next to a settlement, so I do see them a lot. But the point is that when you go, for example, when you go to school, when you go to the, you might see them if you go to the hospital, but most kids don't go to the hospital because, they're healthy. You don't have to see a hospital until you're older. So the diversity and the exchange of people doesn't really happen until you're an adult. And the reason why kids have a mistrust of Jews, even in Jerusalem, is because there is no interaction, and the only interaction is bad interaction. So these
This
girls,
is again a genuine question for me. They're not.
Mhm.
I like to learn from people because I have very little knowledge, and the more people I speak to, the more knowledge I get. My experience of Jerusalem is one of a very mixed city. So if I go to the local mall, it's filled with Muslim shopping. It's got Muslim employees.
Yeah.
I say Muslim because they're more easy to identify than maybe a Christian woman, because a Christian woman's not wearing hijab. And there's a lot more Muslim. But I see a lot of Palestinians or a lot of Arabs that are working and coexisting with Jews. Are you saying that they're not the same Muslims that you grew up with? They will be from Beit Sabafa or Abu Sor or...
I'm saying that the older people will kind of like, as they start to interact more, you'll see it change. I don't know if you know this, but if you're talking about like Malhamal, if you're talking about these areas,
Yeah.
it's something like 70% of the people who work in security in Jerusalem are Palestinians. They dominate the field when it comes to security. So they actually are the ones protecting the malls and protecting the hospitals. If you go to this is a reality. If you're the security guard at the Hebron University, at Hadassah, at Malhamal, they're not, like 7 out of 10 times they're not going to be Jews. They're going to be Palestinians.
The next time I pass through security at Malcolm Mall, that's a Palestinian
so-
security guard giving me a hard time at the checkpoint.
It's true. It's mixed, but what we're doing again is but I'm saying is it takes a while. Like I did not. The only time I had interaction with Jews growing up was when I was overseas, and when I went with my parents to the hospital. That's it. Otherwise there was no interaction. I mean, we don't eat at the same restaurants. We don't go to the same prayers. And in Jerusalem, going to the old city, the only Jews I would see are religious Jews who don't really talk to anybody, and the soldiers and the police. That's it. These were the only Jews as a kid I would speak to. I never had a Jewish teacher. Well, I except in Ulpan later, but I was an adult. That's it. Otherwise, I could have lived my whole life for 18, 20 years and never have interacted with a Jew except a soldier. That's it.
I mean, it still doesn't explain a stabbing motion done by a 9-year-old girl. I mean, it's kind of discouraging to hear this from Joseph, because that's the future.
Al, the problem
That's the
Al, is
future.
that we
That's
don't
the
know.
future
Okay,
generations that are just continuing this cycle. You know what I mean?
Just for
Al-
transparency, just to be completely transparent.
I would love
think
to.
honesty
I
is
would love
really
for
important.
children. Yeah, I would
just want to add one thing to the conversation, which it's not a good thing for my side, but this is so. The following week was the flag march for East Jerusalem, and some Christians from Speaker's Corner messaged me the morning before and said, "Look, we're like a few days before, we're in Jerusalem. Do you want to meet up?" I said, "You're in luck. I'm going to take you. There's a huge Zionist parade that goes through all of the city." And so we went to the normal part of the march, and that was really lovely. They got good footage. They were speaking to everyone. They were surprised at how diverse the Jewish people were, because one of them was black, and he thought he was going to get racially abused until he realized there's loads of black Jews in Israel, and that's not an issue. And then I took them into one of the more hardcore right-wing parts of the march, when it was at Shechem, the Damascus Gate. And they started speaking to an Israeli kid. And he was just like, Mavet la'Arabim, death to the Arabs, and like, just as extreme on our side. So I think that element of radicalization exists on both sides. I don't know if this one group of girls were representative of all East Jerusalem Arabs, or if they happen to come from particularly extreme families. The weirdest part was when I left the park, when I was leaving, they were following behind me as like my little entourage, and their parents, their mothers were all sitting having a picnic, and they saw the girls following this European-looking guy, and they all waved and smiled at me. It was like surreal, not knowing that the daughters had just went sakin, sakin, sakin. But I think that radicalization exists on both sides. I think it's much more from
But is
my
it to the
research,
same
much
extent
more
though?
prevalent on the other side. But
Yeah.
it does exist in corners of our community as well.
Yes,
I
I
mean,
definitely know it exists.
yeah, but what I'm trying to say is that if you go, like, for example, one of the most horrifying days in Jerusalem is the Jerusalem Day March. I mean, some of the crazy stuff that people
So that's
say
why
and
that's what I'm
march.
talking about. That's why I took the
Yeah,
Christian.
exactly. And again, it's like, if you want to like really like lose any hope for humanity, just look at some of the stuff that, like, that crazy old lady that was screaming, the soldier, people were, I mean, kids were attacking. There's been incidents on buses where Palestinian women were assaulted by Jewish youths. You have an organization called Lehava. Lehava. What does Lehava do? They purposely go looking for Arabs and they beat them up in the streets. So I'm not going to say that indoctrination is worse on this, but when it comes to the amount of crimes against people, I'd say Palestinians get attacked more by racist haters than the opposite. Now, this 9-year-old girl, I don't know what her background is. Does she have a situation, military, or her father, or whatever, was in jail? We don't know. But if you want to, if you want to see videos and stuff, there's certain places where we don't go. There are certain people we don't meet. There are certain, like, for example, there's people in my family who I literally will not let them go places during certain times of the year or holidays and stuff because of fear. So this whole thing about, being indoctrinated and stuff,
Just on that point, I do want to pick up on that. My experience is that a Muslim can go through any neighborhood in Jerusalem. Like, literally, I see them Muslims praying, making salah on the side of the street without a care in the world. And I fear I'd be lynched if I went into certain neighborhoods, or like most neighborhoods, truthfully. If I went into most Palestinian communities, I would be lynched. It's my perception. Are you saying that my perception is not true in the inverse?
I'd say that yes and no, but I don't think that Palestinians can go into a certain type of. For example, I would never go and start praying in the middle of Ramot to the northwest, and I know you know Ramot Shlomo in these areas. I wouldn't go there. I wouldn't go to certain areas. In fact, I wouldn't even, So I think that, and the same thing. There are certain neighborhoods, like, for example, I would never recommend for you to go to Essaouira. That neighborhood. In fact, I don't even like to go to Essaouira. I had an aunt that lived there, and I used to hate, visiting her. But so, and again, it depends on the. I think it depends on the neighborhood, but I'd say in general, no. But like I'm saying that the. For example, just a week ago, there was a bunch of Israeli youths who attacked an Arab bus driver. They literally were like, attacking him and hitting him. And where does this come from? I don't know. Does it come from their parents? Does it come from the schools? Does it come from the media? I think it's the same situation for Palestinians. And I don't think growing up Palestinian, I didn't have pictures in cartoon books that showed me killing Jews. That just didn't happen. It didn't happen. My opinions formulated by my experience, by what I saw.
Did you go to an UNRWA school?
No, I didn't go to Unrwa school.
Because I've gone through their textbooks and they're not great. They don't necessarily have diagrams of how to stab a Jew, but they do praise a lot of terrorists in them. But I hear what you're saying. I think it's a lot more dangerous for Jews to go into Palestinian neighborhoods than vice versa. I'm sure there are one or two places you couldn't go. If you wandered up to Yitzhak or one of the settlements,
I mean,
that
I
have a
would
more
I would agree with
reputation.
Joseph. Yeah. I mean, there's
Yeah,
an
but
easy
here's
way.
the-
I mean, there's an easy way to test it. You know, I could disguise myself as a Palestinian and go to a Jewish area. I'd be a lot, calmer for doing that than you, for example, Justin or somebody else disguising himself as a Jew and going into the hardcore Palestinian areas. I mean, you know what I mean?
Yeah, but the
That's the
thing is,
ultimate
Al,
test.
you also have to take into consideration the circumstances are different. Jewish cities are not under siege. They are not under occupation. Palestinian cities are. So and another thing is, like in the West Bank, when a Jew comes into a town and stuff, most of the time he's either a soldier or someone who's coming. For example, the army will come in disguised as civilians to capture somebody. So that element has an effect on how people are treated. If you get what I mean.
I respect that answer.
Yeah. So I'm not going to tell you if a Jew goes to Ramallah, he will. Now, Adar, for example, he's been to Ramallah. There's Gil Schuster, for example. He goes throughout the West Bank.
I've been to Ramallah, but none of these people, myself included, announced that we're Jewish when we go there. I've done
because I'll
documentaries
tell you
with the
why.
BBC
I'll
where
tell you why.
because
Because there's video. Because when people like you come to Jerusalem, it's usually either as a soldier or as a disguise to entrap somebody and to arrest them, to go in. That's the situation, and this was a situation that was created. Then you have what's his name? Saluki.
But Saluki, they're threatening to kill him. He can't go back to Jenin. The guy's a lunatic. I like him, but he's a lunatic.
I mean, Saluki visited the Deir de-Bon. I thought that was an excellent. The guy knew he was Jewish, and he gave him what? He gave him a bottle of olive oil and some jars of olive. I mean, he treated him good. I mean, again, it depends.
No, but I think he got backlash for that afterwards. I think he got backlash for that because he didn't know who he was in the beginning.
No. He knew. He did know him. But yeah, by the way, there's a lot of people from Deir de-Bon community that I know, so that there was no backlash. To be honest with you, the people thought that was hilarious. The Deir de-Bon community is huge.
I know that the Arabs and Palestinians. I know they're very hospitable people. That's true.
Yeah, but that particular incident, by the way, that guy has a lot of clout in his city because he's an interesting guy. I actually know family of him. He was
Saluki, or who are you talking about?
No, not Saluki. The guy that he visited gave him the olives and stuff. He's a former Oakland PD. He's a former police officer. He's a retired police officer from Oakland, California. And
do you think that? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so he's very, very well respected. So whatever he does, he's not going to get backlash from anybody. He holds a lot of clout.
And I mean, it would be ridiculous to get backlash. I mean, the guy's just being hospitable, which just represents the Arab people.
Listen. This guy is so respected in his town. Like I said, he's a former police officer from Oakland, California. He went back. Not only that, but he helped so many people over time because his community. The thing about Tormasaya and Deir de-Bon are interesting cities. It's a city, for example, Tormasaya, where that 14-year-old was killed yesterday. The population, I think, is about 7,000, but in the summer, the population is 25,000. And it's because all the people in the States, in Chicago mainly, and in New York, they all go back for the summer. And so amazing when you go to Turmasaya in the summer, and I go there because that's where I ship my olives and olive oil when I send it to my family. But Turmasaya is this beautiful city in the West Bank, and but because of that, and so Deir de-Bon is another city that's kind of a sister city to it. So they have a lot of people. So he helped a lot of people. So I don't think he faced backlash, to be honest with you.
And also, I think it helps that he looks Arab. It helps that he looks Arab. You know me.
I was just starting to say, back in the 90s, I was a Hebrew U, and right after Oslo, and we had a bunch of Arab students that were studying the Hebrew U with me. And they used to go every night to Ramallah. It was like, it was the good days where... It was a different world. And it was a different world. But I once asked one of the guys. He's a friend of mine. We worked together actually in the same office, whilst being students. And I said, can I come with you one time? Just to sit out, hang out. They were out in the restaurants there. There was nightlife. It was
Let me
crazy.
tell you
And he
this:
said
1990,
his first
19,
his first
19
response was his first response was sure, why not? And then he came back to me after about thinking about it for 10 minutes, and he said, you know what? I don't feel safe. I don't want to take responsibility.
Well, I'll just tell you, in 1990s, first of all, it was a different world in 1990s. You can't compare 1990s to today. Even Gaza was a destination. I don't know if you know this, but Jenin, if you go to Jenin on Thursday nights in the 1990s, on Thursday night, which is basically Israel's Friday night or whatever, weekend night.
Right, the day before June.
Yeah, you when you go to Jenin, you would see more Israeli license plates than Palestinian license plates, because that's where people would go to, because they'd go for food, they'd go for shopping, they'd go. I'm seeing balloons. Anyways, they'd go for all kinds of stuff like that, and those were just different times. And even they went to Gaza. Gaza was a destination for Jews to go and relax on the weekend. In northern Gaza, there was hotel resorts that were, that I think a friend of mine I have in Khan Yunis, he was telling me that his dad actually used to work there. He was worked at one of the restaurants there. And he said that, man, business was good. They would come and they would, sit on the sea and in my neighborhood,
Okay,
for example.
I remember earlier. I remember, the '80s, and giving out my age a little bit. But in the '80s, like people would go to Nablus, and and the restaurant there, going down to the Bika, there was a hummus there, and
Yeah, I mean,
everything was
things
open.
they would do things
Can't
like
go on.
that. Yeah, things for clothing, like for example, because Israeli stores are very expensive. Clothing, for example, getting your tires fixed, like if your
But
car repaired and stuff.
people do that today.
Yeah, they still,
I
yeah,
mean, what was it? Just before the war, maybe not after October 7th, but before that, there was,
yeah,
where was that, in
Was
Shalala or whatever, that those
yeah,
guys were murdered. That there were Jews that were looking for a cheap place to fix their car.
yeah, yeah.
was life better for the Palestinians back in the 90s and 80s in the West Bank and
I
stuff?
wouldn't say the '80s. I don't know the '80s. I mean, movement-wise, yeah. Economically, I think it wasn't, but I think the '90s there was the reason why I wouldn't say that the '90s was better, but the mentality of the 1990s was better, because I honestly think that we really thought there was going to be a solution. I think that mid '90s I really thought that we said, hey, in 5 to 10 years, there'll be a Palestinian state. It's going to live side by Israel. We're going to be able to, have sort of freedom in this. But unfortunately, it didn't happen. Unfortunately, the settlers went from 240,000 to 500 and something thousand. Now today, it's like 750,000. It was a lost
I
opportunity.
remember going to the casino in Jericho.
Oh yeah, the casino. Yeah. Oh man, Benny, you're really telling me your age right now, man. If you could remember the casino, it
No,
was
that was
closed by the
90.
time I. Oh, okay.
That was 90.
Was it 90? Okay, 'cause I just remember the casino.
Yeah,
I
that
never
was
made it to
all
the
after
casino.
Oslo. That was all
But
after Oslo.
Okay.
besides the settlers, was there anything else that triggered the life to be worse for the Palestinians?
There was a lot. I mean, in my opinion, I think there was a lot of improvements. I think the Palestinian Authority, even though we want people call them corrupt and stuff, they did a lot for the Palestinian civil society, in terms of, I mean, Ramallah was a mess. Now Ramallah is a world-class city, in my opinion. I love Ramallah. The giving the Palestinians a national identity, giving them an identity card that they can use around the world. Even though it's not the greatest passport in the world, but giving them the institutions like the ministries of health and education. To be honest with you, I in many ways, Palestinians in the West Bank, forget the settler violence and the occupation and stuff, actually have a better organization than, like, say, Jordan or Egypt. I'm gonna get into trouble with some of these Egyptians. Oh, they're all gone. Anyways, but I love Palestinian civil workers, civil servants.
They're probably some of the best people, greatest minds. Leadership, okay, you can argue our leadership's shit, but our civil servants are actually really good people that do really good work and really help our institutions. I mean, when I go get stuff done with them and stuff, I just really admire a lot of the good work that they do. Ramallah, for example, the municipality of Ramallah is run by great people, and I would even say the governor of Ramallah is doing a great job. The Chamber of Commerce and
Well, I mean, what
like
is
I
the
said,
future for their leadership? What is the future for the Palestinian leadership? Is it until Abbas dies, or how's the succession work in that?
it's political constipation.
Till Barghouti comes out.
Barghouti, that would, but the thing is, it's almost like Israel sometimes doesn't want it to. Israel likes the status quo. I think, to tell you the truth, my opinion, Netanyahu would
Of course,
prefer
Israel doesn't want it.
a dismantled Hamas is better for him. Weakened, dismantled in Gaza is better than a solid PA that's led by a movement that's actually progressive thinking. I think that's his greatest threat.
Barghouti is the Nelson Mandela of the Palestinians right now.
Yeah. I wanted to ask Joseph something, and I can't remember what it is. Hold on a second. Okay, I remember what it is. I've been very pessimistic, but I'm going to be optimistic for a minute. But it requires cooperation from Israel and Israelis and pro-Israeli people. Despite October 7th and despite this war, I think that there's an opportunity to move forward, and I'll tell you why. We have literally the Shia threat, which is a threat that's shared by both Israel and many Sunni states like Saudi Arabia, Jordan, especially Jordan. I think people really underestimate how fearful Jordan is of the Shia threat. The Shia threat in Jordan, which, well, let's not call it Shia threat, let's call it Persian or Iranian. They feel that their government is being destabilized, and I feel that Iran is doing this, and they did it in Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and they want to do it in Jordan and in Palestine. And I think that there's a big interest to counter this. And I think for the first time in probably more than 50 years, we have a unified sort of like threat that I think can unify people for a general purpose. And at the same time, you have Arab states like Jordan, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, UAE. They've offered a proposal. And Syria, which just literally got rid of Bashar al-Assad, basically cut off the supply line to Hezbollah, another proxy of Iran. But Israel, instead of saying we're going to be neutral, we're going to wait and see what happens, they went all crazy on Syria. They attacked. They occupied territories. They're basically trying to look like they're carving out a little part of Syria and stuff like that. And they're ignoring the Arab states, the moderate Arab states. I think this is reckless and dangerous policy, just like I feel about how they're cooperating with these right-wing people, is that this is the opportunity to say, you know what, Jordan, you really did stand with us when we were attacked by Iran. Saudi Arabia, you did it as well, and even with the Houthis. And even now, you are backing up and saying, like the Jordanian foreign minister said, that tomorrow morning we could have a peace. We could do this based on a two-state solution. If Israel does not jump on this bandwagon, I feel that this war is going to basically, it's going to be a fight to the death.
So I think the changing in Israel, I think the thinking in Israel has changed since October 7th. I think pre-October 7th, two-state solution was very much on the table. Now, I think you'll struggle to find Israelis that buy into it. An alternative, something else maybe. But giving the Palestinians or enabling the Palestinians to establish a state after October 7th, I think certainly with consensus at the moment and the way people are thinking here is far less likely to happen than earlier. However, I don't think that changes anything in terms of what you were describing in terms of the bridge building between Israel and the Sunni moderate states. I wouldn't call Al-Julani one of those states, but certainly with the Jordans, the Saudis, the Emiratis, etc., I think those will continue. I think October 7th and the preceding war has definitely created problems and ruptures within those friendships, particularly for the people that those states represent. So I think you're not going to have an issue from the leadership, but you will have an issue, a mass opposition to Israel from the street, from the average Saudi. I mean, in my experience, I've been violently assaulted many times by Muslims from around the world, as most of you probably wouldn't be that surprised if you see my videos. And Saudis have been particularly hostile. And even at the times when we've had the best relations we've ever had with Saudi Arabia, I'm physically getting like into altercations on the streets with Saudis who are like Jew hatred is in, it's certainly Israel hatred is in their blood. And so I don't think that direction of travel of the Sunni states and the leaders of those states working closer and closer with Israel will change. And I think even without a Palestinian state, those relationships will continue to strengthen because, as you said, there's a
I
common
think they'll
enemy.
continue, but I think what it's going to do is going to continue, but it's going to continue while you're going to have extreme and more resentment from the public. And I think that this is eventually, like long term, not a good solution. Even in the UAE, where you have friendly ties, where I think Jews are safer in Dubai than they are probably in many cities in Israel. They are. What I'm saying is that there's a certain limitation, and I think that Jews and Israelis are very short-sighted when it comes to stuff like that. It's almost like we're only concerned about here to a week from now. And I think sometimes that you have to look, I think that sometimes what you're saying is true about Israeli attitude, but I think you also need leadership to say, hey, children, I'm the father. This is what we need to do for the family. And I think even the Palestinians definitely could use somebody like that as well. And we have to rise above that, and leaders need to take the people above that. We cannot rule our people based on their emotions. It's unwise, and this is what we're doing right now. The Palestinians are doing it. And I'm seeing that the pragmatic, and I really don't like some of these authoritarian rulers, but I have to say, in the last year, they have shown a much more pragmatic approach to things about how they want to resolve things, and I feel that they're going to pay the price for it because they did it and they did not, there was nothing reciprocated by the US or by Israel. So they're going to see, you even offered them peace, and what do? They laughed at your face. Like today, right now in the West Bank, there's a general strike. Everybody in the West Bank is having a general strike today. So Al asked me a few weeks ago, where are the real Palestinians who support peace and peaceful protests? Okay, I'll give them to you. Al, today in the West Bank, there's a general strike. All the stores and schools and everybody's boycotting and staying home, and it's a general strike. And you know what Israel's response was? They attacked El Amani refugee camp, Adjala's own refugee camp. They attacked more cities around Jenin. They attacked the Sharafat refugee camp. So when you ask these questions, where is the Palestinian peace movement? Today, there was a Palestinian peace initiative, a general strike. How much more peaceful protest can we get than that? You know, it didn't involve guns. And what is Israel's response?
That's not a peace protest, though. That's a protest for themselves. It's not to do with peace with Israel. Or have I missed something there?
No, a general strike was called today in the West Bank to because of Gaza, because of the massacre. Okay, so it was a general strike. But what I'm saying is, it wasn't a general. It was a general strike. It's not going to affect Israelis because well, it kind of does because many of them work, maybe do work or something like that. But what I'm trying to tell you is that these questions about where's the peaceful Palestinians, and here's an example. How was it met when they announced the general strike? Israel assaulted 4 refugee camps yesterday. And they attacked they moved troops into the Arab areas of Hebron.
But
so
those
this was the
protests are
response.
against Israel. They're not pro-Israel protests. They're not pro-peace protests.
What do you mean they're not? No, but I'm saying they're anti-occupation and war protests.
That's not.
But
I think what he's trying to say, they're not violent protests. Is that what you're trying to say? They're not violent.
Exactly.
They're peaceful.
Yeah. So basically, this notion that there's no peaceful Palestinian protests, that there's no Gandhi. I think someone said there's no Gandhi in Palestine. There's no this.
People answer that's not what they're saying. Because there's plenty of peaceful protests amongst Palestinians. They march constantly. Every Jummah after khutbah, they march on the streets, often non-violently.
But Joseph, this is a question that Al. This is a question that Al has asked me many times. So I'm just telling you.
Sorry.
So, but what I'm trying to say is that today we have that. We have an example. I mean, what's more non-combatant than a strike? We're gonna, this was a tactic used by many people in the civil rights movement. It was used. For example, the Montgomery, was it Montgomery, where they boycotted the buses, where the black people said we're not gonna ride buses or something, and they were, the bus company was like, hey, you guys are our biggest customers, etc. So these are things that, but how it's reacted to is the same. But I think that in regards to what I was saying earlier, I think that you're going by the emotions of people, and I understand the emotions of people. But about when we were talking about October 7th, when I asked you about the question, is the opportunity now, because the opportunity now to counter this. I'm sorry to go back and forth, but to counter what we have as a perceived threat that both of us people see, I think that this is an opportunity, and I don't know if there will be another opportunity. To be honest with you,
so I think the way you started the conversation actually is a much better representation of everything that followed, because everything that followed was, I actually had I learned a lot from you, as I always do whenever I speak to Palestinians. I learned about your lived experience. I learned about your family's lived experience. You said a lot of things that made an awful lot of sense, but you opened you open your statements with, I wish you weren't here. That I may be in a room with Israelis, I may be working towards coexistence, but at my heart, I wish you weren't here, and I wish you would just disappear away from this land. Mm-hmm. And that's been the mentality of the Palestinians since the 20s. No, you can't, obviously the numbers grew, but that idea has been present basically from the beginning of the Zionist building up, the Zionist project, the building up of the land. And that's the for me, that's the issue. And that's not good. Israelis and Palestinians working together, Israelis and Palestinians coexisting, living in the same land, relaxing security measures, all of that isn't going to change that underlying desire of the majority of Palestinians for the Jews to just disappear. And until October the 7th, I don't think that was the pervasive feeling of Israelis. I think October 7th has changed that. But before, I don't think the Jews just wanted the Arabs to disappear. And I've been reading and studying this conflict my entire life, and my lived experience, all of my research suggests that wasn't the sentiment, but that is the sentiment today. Today, people who used to be the biggest peace advocates you could imagine, are now hawks that are saying they all need to go. We need to empty Gaza. There can't be an Arab left here. They can't live with us. They're sociopaths, etc. And I think you framed it perfectly. If we were to meet under separate circumstances in the UK or in America, and you weren't Palestinian, I wasn't Israeli, Jewish, we'd get on fine. But because of who I am,
yeah. But the thing is, look at it from this perspective. Because I hear it all the time. Like, Jews will say to me, like, oh, I used to think this, but October 7th changed everybody's mentality. But what if I said to you, I used to believe that Jews could exist with us, that they could actually be fair. But Operation Cast Lead that killed 2,500 Palestinians in 1 month changed my mind. And I'm just saying, is like, I get trauma and I can understand trauma. But what I can't understand is, why are we able or expected to give up on our trauma to make peace, but Israelis aren't? And I feel like it's almost like this self-centered, exclusive, like, we are the only people allowed to suffer. We are the only people allowed to have trauma because October 7th was worse than anything ever before. But it's like, we have...
What I'm saying is the Jews have always been prepared to coexist, which is why there are millions of Arabs with full citizenship of Israel. But there's no Jewish Palestinians. For that very reason, the Jews were always willing to share the land, and the Arabs weren't. And you open this, you're clearly a very reasonable person that doesn't wish harm on people and wants peace, etc. But even you open the conversation with, I don't want you here. I wish you just disappear.
Well, I mean, I just told you that's the mentality of most people. Of course,
I agree. And I'm saying that's the issue.
Yeah,
but
it's the issue. But everybody who is at war, people who are at war with each other, don't. I mean, come on, let's be honest. We're not going to sit here and say that.
The only reason I think you'll ever see change amongst Palestinian society, from my experience, and I'm probably wrong on this, but it's my very limited exposure take, would be desperation. So in the sense that if you feel there is no other option but coexistence, then you will give up on the dream of driving the Jews into the sea.
Yeah, but wouldn't you say that the reason why 20% of the population of Israel are Palestinians is because they basically, these were people that they drove out almost 75-80% of them, and these people had remained. So it's and
So
then
you
it
know
took
the
them
book
20
I'm
years.
reading. You know, I mentioned this book. It's a fascinating book to
But
read. It was
but
the first time
it took them 20 years to give these people citizenship. So it's not like Israel, out of the goodness of his heart, said let's coexist and keep them. These people lived under military rule. You know, Israel has been a democracy for 6 months. Okay, from 1966 to 1967, Israel was a democracy when they gave citizenship to the Palestinians that had lived in the country for almost 20 years. And then in 1967, they went and they took over a country now where about 5 million Palestinians live. So this whole notion that Israel does want to coexist, they gave citizenship to, come on, dude, it doesn't
But
fly.
my point is the Arabs weren't driven from the. So the book I'm reading is fascinating first-hand testimony of what happened. It's not propaganda; it's someone's diary, so it's very interesting. But he's someone who's very connected because he's a kind of radio operator, and so he's in shock that the Arab resistance collapsed and Haifa fled and Jaffa fled, and they're expecting each of the neighborhoods in Jerusalem to flee, and it's fascinating reading his account of what's happening. It's one of many books you can read, but it's just I'm reading this one at the moment, so it's fresh in my mind. But the Arabs that didn't flee, they remained in the land. They weren't driven out. Every Jew that was living on the land that the Jordanians and the Egyptians took was driven out. There were no Jews left in those communities, and to this day, there's no Jews there. And you expressed the sentiment yourself that you wished we weren't in the areas that we are today. We'd just disappear. And that's the issue. That's why the conflict continues. Is there's this belief
But also
at some point the
two-thirds of
Jews will be
Palestinians,
driven out.
two-thirds of Palestinians that even stayed in the 48 territories were displaced from areas they were from. So the people who live in Faham today are not necessarily all from Faham. So these people were also displaced. So to say that these people had remained and they took citizenship and they coexisted, that didn't happen.
No, I'm saying they fled the fighting. They fled the fighting, which makes sense. You want if the Haganah and the Iraqi regulars are clashing, you don't want to be near there. You want to leave. You want to take your wife and your children. Also, the book's fascinating because it contradicts a lot of my thing. The day I've just read, he was saying how the Haganah were giving a broadcast encouraging the Arabs to leave, telling them there was going to be a bloodbath, and so you should leave, take your woman, take your children, and go, which contradicts the normative Zionist narrative of it was just the Arab states that told the.
Kind of brings us back to our first debate 4 years ago, huh?
Yeah.
It was exactly on that topic.
And so my point with all of this is, though, there is a belief, but certainly at the point of October the 7th, that the Jews could be defeated, that the Muslims would rise up, that the Muslim armies would march on Israel and drive the Jews out. You opened the conversation yourself with, "I wish you'd disappear," and I've come to the realization. I think this is probably what most Israelis think, that the only way that there will be peace is to demonstrate that we won't be driven into the sea. It is a.
Let me ask you this: do you think it's better to approach it from a position of strength or when you're weaker? Don't you think it would be wiser for Israel right now has the United States, they have the West, they have the military superiority. The Palestinians are in no way, I can't even see the Palestinians in the next 50 years even being able to challenge the Israeli military. Wouldn't you say that it's better now to take the initiative, to take wise leaders, and to move it into a position and make the peace that you want? Because I feel that later you're not going to have support from the U.S. You're not going to have support like you do from the West. That you're going to be forced to accept a peace that may not be so pleasing to you. So, and I'm telling you, hey, if I was a true Palestinian and I had no stake in the game, I would say let's wait 10 more years because the world's going to look a lot different in 10 more years, in my opinion, and you know why. So maybe in my interest. But the problem is I have an emergency situation now. That's why I'm sitting here talking to people, okay? Because if I was living in Jordan refugee camp or living in Lebanon or something, I would say, you know what? Let's hold off another 10 years because the stakes are going to change. So if again, you shouldn't listen to the emotions of people. You should listen to the people who have a long-term way of thinking. And making peace now when you're in a position of power is 100 times better than making peace later when you have less cards on the table, or whatever the expression is.
I hear that, but I think the natural reaction to that would be the 2005 disengagement, and what happened consequently from then. I think that's the feeling. I don't know. I haven't got a crystal ball. I don't know what the right path forward for Israel is. I wish I did, but I'm not so sure a Palestinian state on Israel's doorstep. While the prevailing attitude amongst most Palestinians is they hope the Jews